She had everything money could buy, and she was dying inside. Evelyn Ashcroft ran a billion-dollar empire, commanded boardrooms on 3 continents, and appeared on the covers of magazines that ordinary people read while waiting in line at the grocery store. But at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, she was sitting on the marble floor of her kitchen, one of 4 kitchens in a house too large for one person, with her back against a cabinet that cost more than most people's cars, unable to remember the last time she had spoken to someone who actually meant it. She didn't call for help. People like Evelyn Ashcroft didn't do that. Someone came anyway. Hit the like button. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The call came at 11:14 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October, and Mason Ryder almost didn't answer it. He was in the middle of a carefully negotiated bedtime routine, the 3rd attempt of the evening, trying to coax his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, back under the covers after she had gotten up twice already. Once for water, and once because she claimed she heard something that turned out to be the neighbor's cat sitting on the windowsill. He had the lamp on low and was reading from a picture book about a bear who couldn't sleep, which, he realized with some irony, was not helping either of them. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a name he hadn't seen in a few weeks, Connor. "Daddy," Lily said immediately, as though the phone had personally offended her. "You said no phones." "I know, Bug." He glanced at the screen. Connor Hale didn't call at 11 o'clock at night for no reason. "Give me 1 second." "That's what you always say." "1 second, Lily." He stepped into the hallway, pulling the door halfway behind him so she could still see the light, and answered. "Connor, what's going on?" "Mason." The voice on the other end was tight, strained in a way Mason recognized. Connor was a guy who dealt with stress by becoming very controlled, very measured, which meant when that control slipped, something was actually wrong. "I need a favor. I need it tonight." "Okay." Mason leaned against the hallway wall. "Talk to me." "I'm in Singapore. Flight got canceled, the next one out isn't until Thursday morning, and I've been trying to reach my sister for the last 4 hours. A pause. "She's not answering." "Evelyn?" "She's the only sister I have, yeah." Mason had met Evelyn Ashcroft exactly twice. Once at Connor's birthday dinner 3 years ago, briefly, where she had arrived late from what he gathered was an important meeting in another time zone, and once at a mutual friend's wedding, where she had sat at the head table and left before the cake was cut. Both times she had been polished, composed, and utterly unreachable in the way that very successful people sometimes are, like there was a pane of glass between them and everyone else. He remembered dark hair, a dark dress, a handshake that was firm and efficient. He remembered thinking she seemed exhausted underneath it. "Is she in trouble?" he asked. "I don't know." Connor's voice cracked just slightly. "That's the thing. She's not answering her phone, and she's not responding to texts, and her housekeeper texted me at 9, saying she let herself in to drop something off, and Evelyn was just sitting there, in the kitchen, on the floor. And when the housekeeper asked if she was okay, she said yes and asked her to leave." Mason was quiet for a moment. "She's not going to hurt herself," Connor said quickly, as though he'd anticipated the question. That's not what this is. She's not in danger like that. But she's been in a really bad place since... It's been a hard year, Mason. She lost someone she was very close to, and I've been gone for 3 weeks, and I think she's been alone, and I think the nights are getting really hard, and I need someone to go check on her. That's it. Just go by, make sure she's okay, and text me. Connor, I know it's late. I know you have Lily. If you can't, tell me now and I'll figure something else out. But you're the only person I trust enough to send there who won't make it weird. Mason rubbed the back of his neck. Down the hall, he could hear Lily talking to herself, probably narrating the picture book to her stuffed rabbit, which was a thing she did. "What's the address?" he said. The relief in Connor's voice was immediate and genuine. "I'm sending it now. Mason. Thank you, really." "Don't thank me yet. Go to sleep. You're in Singapore." "I can't sleep." "Neither can I, apparently." Mason glanced back toward Lily's room. "I'll call you after." He hung up, went back in, tucked Lily in for what he genuinely hoped was the final time, and told her he had to go help a friend, but that Mrs. Kowalski from next door would be right there and would check on her every 20 minutes, and she could text him from the tablet if she needed him. Lily regarded him with the deeply suspicious expression of a 6-year-old who has been promised things before. What kind of friend? Someone who needs help. Are they sick? Not exactly. Then what's wrong with them? Mason thought about how to answer that. They're lonely, Bug, he said finally, and sometimes that's just as hard. Lily considered this with unusual seriousness, then nodded, satisfied. Okay, but come home before I wake up. I'll try. Don't try. Do it. Good night, Lily. He kissed her forehead, texted Mrs. Kowalski, pulled on his jacket, and got in the car. The address Connor had sent led Mason to a neighborhood in the north of the city where the houses weren't houses so much as statements. Large gated properties set back from tree-lined streets, lit with the kind of subtle exterior lighting that cost more to install than Mason's annual salary. He drove through slowly, checking the numbers on the gates, until he found the one that matched. He sat outside for a moment, engine idling. It was an enormous place. Even from the gate, even in the dark, he could see the scale of it. 3 stories, wide stone steps leading up to a front entrance flanked by columns, wings extending on either side, windows that went floor to ceiling on the ground level and glowed warmly from within. There was a fountain in the circular drive that wasn't running. Hedges trimmed into perfect geometric shapes lined both sides of the path. It was, objectively, a beautiful house. It looked incredibly lonely. He pressed the intercom button on the gate panel. Waited. Pressed it again. A long pause. Then a voice came through the speaker. Female, controlled, a little hoarse at the edges. Who is it? Mason Ryder. I'm a friend of your brother's. He asked me to check on you. Silence. I'm not here to bother you, he added. Connor's stuck overseas and he's worried. You can tell me you're fine and I'll go. I don't need to come in. Another pause, longer this time. He could almost feel the internal debate happening on the other side of it. It's 11:30, she said. I know. I'm sorry about that. Connor didn't leave me a lot of options. You could have not come. Yeah, he admitted. I could have. The gate buzzed and swung inward. She answered the door herself, which somehow surprised him. He had expected, he wasn't sure what, a housekeeper maybe, or some kind of assistant. But Evelyn Ashcroft opened the heavy front door of her own home wearing dark pants and an oversized gray sweater that was slightly too big for her. Sleeves rolled up, barefoot on the marble entryway, hair loose and a little undone in a way that suggested she hadn't planned on anyone seeing it. She looked nothing like either of the 2 versions of her he remembered. She looked like a real person, which sounds like an unkind thing to think about someone. But Mason didn't mean it that way. He meant that the distance he'd sensed in her before, that pane of glass, was gone, replaced by something rawer and less managed. She had dark circles under her eyes. Her posture was straight out of habit, but her shoulders held tension that he recognized, the particular tension of someone who had been holding themselves together for a long time. Mason Ryder, she said, as though testing the name. That's me. He held up both hands slightly, a kind of non-threatening gesture. Confirmed non-threat, just checking in. Something flickered across her face. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. You look different than I remember. I'm usually asleep by now, probably why. She stepped back from the doorway, which he took as an invitation, and he came inside. The entryway was a lot. High ceilings, a chandelier that wasn't ostentatious so much as simply enormous, a curved staircase to the right, hallways branching in 2 directions. Somewhere deeper in the house, he could hear the quiet hum of a sound system playing something low and orchestral. The floors were polished to the kind of shine that made him acutely aware of his boots. You didn't have to come, she said. She was walking ahead of him toward what he guessed was the kitchen, and her voice had the careful quality of someone who has rehearsed being fine. I'm perfectly all right. Connor said your housekeeper found you sitting on the floor. A small pause in her stride. Maria has a very active imagination. She texted Connor. Maria has very active fingers as well. She pushed through a door into the kitchen, and it was exactly as Connor had described it in the aggregate sense, though the specifics were beyond what Mason had pictured. A kitchen that was larger than his entire apartment, all white marble and dark cabinetry and restaurant-grade appliances that probably had never been used for anything more complicated than reheating takeout. And yes, there it was, the cabinet in the corner, the one nearest the island. He noticed without commenting on it. She moved to the counter and filled a glass from a filtered tap. "Do you want water?" "Sure." She filled a second glass and handed it to him, and they stood on opposite sides of the enormous island in the enormous kitchen, and it was, Mason thought, one of the stranger moments of his recent life, which had already contained a fair number of strange moments. "So," he said, "how are you doing?" "I already told you, I'm fine." "Right." He looked at the glass in his hand. "But I drove 40 minutes to get here, so—" "I didn't ask you to." "No, Connor asked me to." "And you always do what Connor asks?" "Not always." But he sounded scared. He looked up at her. He's not easy to scare. That landed. He could see it, the slight shift in her expression, the way her jaw tightened briefly before she looked away. "He worries too much," she said, quieter now. "About you?" "Maybe." Mason set his glass down. "Or maybe he has good reason to." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, through the tall windows, the city glittered distantly, a sparkling reminder of a world that kept moving whether anyone inside this house was okay or not. "I don't need anyone to take care of me," Evelyn said. Her voice was even, controlled, but she didn't look at him when she said it. "I know," he said. "That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" It was a genuine question, not a hostile one. Or it started as a hostile one and became genuine partway through, like she had surprised herself by actually wanting to know the answer. Mason thought about it honestly. "Because someone asked me to be," he said, "and because sometimes that's enough of a reason." She looked at him then, really looked at him, with that particular attention people give you when they're deciding whether to trust something you've said. "You can sit down," she said finally. "If you want. You don't have to stand there." He pulled out one of the bar stools at the island. She stayed on her side of it, arms folded loosely across her chest, which was the posture of someone who had not quite decided to be open but had stopped actively being closed. He recognized that too. "Tell me about your daughter," she said. "Connor talks about her." "Lily?" "Lily, yeah." He felt the specific warmth that came with the name. 6 years old, going on 45. She sent me off tonight with a very firm set of instructions. "Did she know where you were going?" "I told her a friend needed help." "What did she say?" "She wanted to know what was wrong with the friend. I told her they were lonely. She thought about it for approximately 10 seconds and then said, okay, like she was approving a business decision." Evelyn's mouth curved at the corner. A small thing, but real. "She sounds like a serious person," she said. "She has opinions about everything, what color plate her food goes on, what order the books get stacked, whether a banana is too ripe. I've never met a child with stronger feelings about bananas." "And her mother?" The question was careful, measured. She'd probably already known something from Connor, was gauging how much to ask. "She passed away," he said simply, "when Lily was 3. Ovarian cancer." "I'm sorry." And she meant it. He could hear that she meant it in a specific way, the way people mean it when they know something about loss that isn't abstract. "Thank you." He paused. "Connor mentioned you lost someone too, this year." The slight stillness that moved through her at that. "My mentor," she said after a moment. "Helen. She was the one who believed in me before anyone else did. When I was 22 and pitching my first business idea, and everyone in the room was waiting for me to fail." A pause. "She was 71, heart attack in the spring." "I'm sorry." "People keep saying that." She said it without bitterness, just observation. "I know they mean it. I know it's the right thing to say, but it doesn't—" She stopped. "It doesn't touch it," he said. She looked at him. "No, it doesn't touch it." They moved from the kitchen eventually, after a while, after the conversation had drifted through Connor's various business disasters, and Lily's opinions on animated movies and the best and worst things about Singapore that Mason had never been to, but Connor had described in excruciating detail over the years. and ended up in a sitting room off the main hallway that was less formally arranged than most of the spaces he'd seen. A sectional sofa in deep charcoal, a low table, a fireplace that Evelyn turned on with a remote, and shelves along one wall crowded with books that were actually read. He could tell by the way they sat on the shelves, slightly crooked, some with spines cracked, a few with pages dog-eared despite what he imagined was a very expensive aesthetic preference for tidiness. He noticed a framed photograph on one of the shelves. Two women, one older and one younger. The older with silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. The younger unmistakably Evelyn, maybe 5 or 6 years younger, both of them mid-laugh at something outside the frame. He didn't say anything about it, but he saw it. Evelyn tucked herself into the corner of the sectional with her knees pulled up slightly, which was the first genuinely unguarded physical position he'd seen her in. He sat at the other end, leaving a reasonable amount of space, and they talked. Not about serious things for a while. She asked him about his job. He was a structural engineer, mid-level at a firm that dealt mostly in commercial renovation. And he asked her about Ashcroft Industries, which was described in financial publications as a technology and infrastructure company, but which she described as a collection of problems I've agreed to be responsible for. She was dryly funny in a way he hadn't expected. She made a joke about a deal she'd lost to a competitor 3 months ago that she framed as a disaster, and then immediately undercut by describing the competitor's subsequent press conference, which had apparently been a masterclass in corporate hubris. "Did you watch it live?" he asked. "I may have watched it twice," she admitted. "That's evil." It was extremely educational. He laughed. A real laugh, not a polite one. She looked pleased with herself, and then immediately looked like she was surprised to look pleased with herself, as though she'd forgotten for a moment that she was supposed to be managing everything. "You're different than I expected," she said. "You said something like that at the door, too." "I meant it both times." She tilted her head. "Connor talks about you as though you're very serious, a responsible person, a good father." "That sounds like a backhanded compliment." "I don't mean it as one. I just—" She paused, searching. "I expected someone more, composed." "It's midnight," he said. "If you're getting composed Mason at midnight, call me on a Tuesday afternoon." "What are you on a Tuesday afternoon?" "Probably on my 3rd cup of coffee, trying to figure out why a load-bearing column in a parking garage in the financial district is doing something it shouldn't be doing." "That sounds worrying." "It is, a little bit, but structurally interesting." "Do you love your work?" The directness of the question surprised him. Not because it was an unusual question. People asked it all the time in the vague social way, but because she asked it like she actually wanted to know, like she was leaning on the specific word love and treating it seriously. "Yeah," he said, "I do. I love the puzzle of it. You look at something that's failing and you have to figure out why and what it would take to make it not fail. And usually it's not one thing, it's a combination of things, and you have to hold all of them in your head at once." She was quiet for a moment. "That's how I think about companies," she said. "Except companies fight back. Parking garages fight back too, just more slowly." "And quietly," she said. "Until they don't." "Until they don't," he agreed. The fire made soft sounds. The music from somewhere in the house had shifted. Something slower and more muted now. "Can I ask you something?" she said, and the tone shifted slightly, careful now. "Sure." "After your wife died." She stopped. "Sorry, I don't—" "It's okay." "After she died. How long did it take before the house stopped feeling like the wrong size?" He thought about that. Thought about it honestly, because she was asking it honestly and she deserved an honest answer. 3 years, he said. Maybe more. The house didn't change size, but I stopped feeling like I was rattling around in it. A pause. Or maybe I got better at filling the space. I started leaving more of Lily's stuff everywhere. Drawings on the fridge, toys in every room. The house is a mess, basically, but it feels like someone lives there. She looked around the sitting room, at the perfection of it, the absence of clutter, the precisely arranged cushions and the surfaces without anything personal on them except for the one photograph, which sat on the shelf like a small rebellion against everything else. "I keep making everything look right," she said softly. "Because when it looks right, I feel like I'm managing. And when no one's here to see it? She didn't answer, which was an answer. Around 1 a.m., Evelyn got up to make tea. Actual tea, from loose leaves, in a process that took longer than Mason expected and that she seemed to find grounding, the small mechanical work of it, the measuring and the timing. He watched her from his position on the sectional, not offering to help, understanding that this was something she wanted to do herself. She brought back 2 mugs, handed him one, and settled again. The fire had burned lower. "Tell me something about Helen," he said. She looked at him. "If you want to," he added. A long pause, then, "She told the worst jokes." A small, rueful sound. Genuinely terrible, puns mostly, and she would set them up for 5 minutes, 5 full minutes of context, and then land something so bad you'd groan, and she'd absolutely delight in the groan, like the groan was the point. Some people are like that. She was entirely like that. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the mug. "I used to call her on Sunday mornings. We talked every Sunday morning for 11 years. She'd tell me about her garden. She had an enormous garden, vegetables mostly. She was inordinately proud of her tomatoes. And then she'd tell me a joke, and I'd tell her about whatever I was working on, and she'd say something that reframed the entire problem in about 30 seconds. A pause. She made everything seem possible. Not in a... She wasn't motivational, exactly. She didn't say the right things, she just thought about things clearly and said what she actually saw. She sounds like a rare person." She was. Evelyn's voice was steady, but barely. "The first Sunday after she died, I sat by the phone for a while before I remembered." He let that sit for a moment. "And since then," she said, quieter now, "the Sundays are just..." She stopped again, pressed her lips together. 11 years is a long time to have a standing call." "Yeah," he said. "It is. I've tried. I've kept working, obviously. I keep moving because moving means I don't have to feel the particular specific quietness of a Sunday morning without her." She exhaled. "And eventually Sunday turns into Monday, and Monday turns into a week. And I think, all right, I've gotten through that. And then Sunday comes around again." Mason looked at his tea, thought about the particular specific quietness of a house at 6 a.m. with a 3-year-old asleep upstairs and a wife who wasn't there anymore, and the strange, disorienting experience of time continuing to move when something enormous and important had stopped. "The problem with grief," he said slowly, "is that it doesn't happen once. You don't go through it and come out the other side. It's more like it's a room you keep walking into by accident. You're going somewhere else, and you turn a corner, and you're back in it. And it's just as..." He searched for the right word. "Just as full as it was the first time." Evelyn was looking at him. "But the room starts to have other things in it," he continued, "over time. It doesn't get smaller. It just starts to share space with other stuff. And you learn to walk through it without stopping every time." She was quiet for a long moment. "Does it actually work that way?" she said. "Or are you just saying something that sounds like it should be true?" He appreciated that she asked. He appreciated that she didn't take it on faith. "Mostly it works that way," he said. "Some days it just works like getting hit by a bus." She laughed. Unexpectedly, genuinely, a real laugh that broke through whatever she'd been holding and then stopped quickly, like she'd surprised herself with it. "That's very honest," she said. "You seem like someone who prefers that." She looked at him steadily. "I do." Somewhere past 2 in the morning, Evelyn's composure stopped being composure and became something else. Not a breakdown in the dramatic sense, nothing like that. It was quieter. She was talking about Helen again, about a specific afternoon they had spent together last winter, walking through a botanical garden that Helen had wanted to see because she'd read about a particular orchid exhibit, and how neither of them had said anything significant the whole time, just walked and looked at flowers, and how that afternoon had felt so ordinary that Evelyn hadn't thought to value it as much as she should have. "I keep thinking about ordinary afternoons," she said. "I keep thinking about how many of them there are, and how you don't know which one is the last one until it is." "Yeah." Mason set down his mug. "I know about that. Do you ever wish you'd said something more? To your wife?" She asked it carefully, but asked it. "All the time. He didn't soften it. There are things I didn't say because I thought I had more time to say them. That's just true. A pause. And then I had to decide whether I was going to carry that as guilt or as a reason to say things sooner, next time, to people who are still here. She looked at the fire. I don't talk to people the way I talk to Helen, she said. I don't know how to do that with anyone else. She knew me from before the company, before any of this. She knew who I was when I was just a kid with a spreadsheet and an idea that might not work. A pause. The people around me now know me as this. A gesture, small, vague, encompassing the entire enormous house. And I don't know how to show them anything other than this. You're showing me something other than this right now, he said. She blinked, like she'd forgotten momentarily. You sat on your kitchen floor, he said, not unkindly. That's something. That was not intentional. A lot of the important stuff isn't. He looked at her steadily. Evelyn, you've been running on all cylinders in every direction except the one that's actually keeping you up at night. That's not a character flaw. That's just what happens when the work becomes the only thing that doesn't hurt. A silence. A long one. I'm very tired, she said finally. And the way she said it, it wasn't about sleep. He understood that. It was the particular exhaustion of maintaining something at a cost you can no longer fully afford. I know, he said. I've been tired for months and I haven't told anyone because… She stopped. Because you're Evelyn Ashcroft. Because I'm Evelyn Ashcroft, she agreed, and there was something wry and exhausted and honest in how she said it, like she was simultaneously proud of the name and slightly imprisoned by it. Well, Mason said, it's 2 a.m. and there's no one here but me. And I don't work for you, and I'm not going to write anything down, and I'm not going to treat you differently because of it. He paused. So if you need to be tired out loud for a little while, that's fine. She looked at him for a long moment, then something in her shoulders let go. Not all the way. Not completely, but enough that he could see it. The slight drop. The small release of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time. Mason texted Connor at 2:47 a.m. She's okay. I'm staying a while longer. Try to sleep. Connor responded in under a minute, which told Mason that he had not been sleeping at all. Thank you. Really. I owe you. Mason put his phone face down on the coffee table. Outside, a light rain had started. He could hear it against the tall windows of the sitting room. A soft, irregular sound, the kind that would normally be easy to sleep to. Inside, the fire had burned to a steady, low glow. Evelyn had made more tea. She was talking about her company now. Not the performance of it, not the press release version, but the actual texture of it, the things that frustrated her, the decisions that kept her up even on nights that weren't like this one. A particular division head who was excellent at his job and terrible at working with other people. A product launch that had gone exactly as planned and somehow still felt empty afterward. You know what the strangest part of success is? She said. It doesn't actually feel like anything. You hit a milestone, a real one, the kind you imagined when you were starting out. And there's a moment, a very brief moment, of something like relief. And then it's gone. And the next thing is already in front of you and it needs your attention. Did anyone tell you it would feel different? Everybody told me it would feel different. She curled her fingers around her mug. Helen told me the truth. She said the work would feel meaningful if I made it mean something, and empty if I didn't. She said achievements were exits, not destinations. A pause. I thought I understood that. I understood it intellectually. But understanding something and feeling it are 2 different rooms, he said. She smiled at that tiredly. Yes. He thought about her sitting on the kitchen floor earlier in the evening before he'd arrived. Thought about what it takes to be a person who runs a billion-dollar company and still has an evening where the weight of everything gets too heavy to carry standing up. He didn't find it contradictory. He found it, if anything, more coherent than most things. Can I say something? He asked. You've been saying things all evening. I haven't stopped you yet. The company stuff, the achievement stuff. I think you already know what you need to do about that. You're smart enough to have figured that out 10 times over. That's not the problem. She looked at him. The problem, he said, is that you've been doing this alone, not the work. The work you can do in your sleep, probably. The actual living of it. The eating of dinner and the sitting through Sundays and the... He gestured vaguely. The all of it. Alone in a house that's very beautiful and very quiet. Her jaw tensed slightly. That's not a critique, he added quickly. That's just an observation. From someone who spent about 18 months doing the exact same thing after Sarah died, and who probably would have kept doing it indefinitely if Lily hadn't needed me to start making actual meals instead of eating cereal over the sink. A small sound from Evelyn, something between a laugh and a breath. I eat over the sink sometimes, she admitted. In this kitchen? In this kitchen. Alone? Obviously alone. She said it without self-pity, which somehow made it sadder. My executive chef comes 3 days a week. The other 4 days I manage on my own, which usually means cereal over the sink. Toast, actually, or whatever's easiest. A pause. It's strange, isn't it? You'd think the solution would be to just have someone in more often, have people around, make use of another vague gesture. But the people who work for me aren't... They're not with you, he said. No. Quiet. They're not with me. The rain was coming down steadier now, against the windows, against the roof, filling the silence with something that at least wasn't empty. Around 3:30, Evelyn asked him if he needed to leave. He thought about it honestly. Lily was asleep, and Mrs. Kowalski was right next door with the key, and he had texted an update an hour ago and received a thumbs-up emoji in response, which from Irina Kowalski, who was 67 and had only recently learned to use emojis and deployed them with great solemnity, meant everything was fine. I don't need to, he said. You should sleep. So should you. She looked at the fire. I don't much. Sleep. Since Helen? Since Helen. A pause. I lie down and it's quiet and my brain... She shook her head. It doesn't stop. Have you talked to anyone? Like a professional? The slight tightening of her expression. I know, he said. Wrong question. It's not the wrong question. It's the right question, and I have a very good therapist who I've been avoiding for approximately 3 months. That tracks. Does it? You seem like someone who's very good at knowing exactly what she should do and finding extremely sophisticated ways to not do it. She gave him a sharp look. Then, that's accurate. Unfortunately. The therapist probably isn't going to chase you down. She might, actually. She has opinions. Good. He meant it. Then let her have them. Evelyn looked at him. A long, steady look. The kind that meant she was taking someone's measure. He'd gotten a few of those tonight. He tried to be worth them. Why are you still here? She asked. Not hostilely, genuinely curious. Because you haven't asked me to leave. That's the only reason? He thought about that. About the real answer. Because I remember what it was like to have someone just stay, he said. After Sarah died. There was one night, early on, where my sister came over and she didn't do anything. Didn't make food, didn't clean anything, didn't make me talk. She just sat in the same room with me and watched television for 4 hours. Bad television. And that was probably the most important thing anyone did for me in that whole period. He paused. Staying is underrated. Evelyn was quiet. It's very late, she said. It is. And you drove 40 minutes. Closer to 45 with traffic. I didn't even ask you if you wanted tea. I just made it. I drank 2 cups. I think we're good. She was quiet again, looking at the fire. And then, very quietly, she said, Thank you for staying. He didn't make it into a thing. You're welcome. They stayed there, on either end of the sectional, while the rain continued against the windows and the fire glowed its low, steady glow, until somewhere around 4 in the morning when Evelyn's breathing slowed and her eyes closed and she simply fell asleep, tucked into the corner of the sofa, still in her gray sweater. Mason sat quietly for a while, not moving, not wanting to wake her. He thought about Lily asleep at home, about Connor awake in Singapore, too worried to sleep, about Sarah, the way he always thought about Sarah in quiet middle-of-the-night moments, when the world was still enough to hold the memory of her. He thought about the woman asleep across the room, about what it must have taken to get through the years she'd gotten through, the loss she'd carried in the particular solitary way of someone who doesn't know how to be witnessed. About the photograph on the shelf, the laughing woman with the reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. About 11 years of Sunday phone calls and an orchid exhibit in winter. He didn't wake her. He got up quietly and found a blanket on the back of an armchair, cashmere, heavy, warm, and laid it over her. She shifted slightly but didn't wake. He went back to his end of the sofa. He thought, Connor was right to be worried. He thought, she's going to be okay. He thought, that's not a small thing. It's not nothing. He closed his own eyes. Outside, the rain kept coming down, steady and unhurried and patient against the windows of the enormous quiet house. Mason woke up first. That was a strange sentence to apply to a situation he hadn't planned on being in, but there it was. He opened his eyes at 6:14 in the morning, according to his phone, disoriented for a half-second by the unfamiliar ceiling above him, and then he remembered. The sitting room. The fire, now completely out, the great gray and cold. The rain had stopped at some point while he slept. Through the tall windows, the sky was doing the particular thing it does in the hour just before actual sunrise, where it isn't dark anymore but hasn't committed to light either. Everything washed in a pale, uncertain gray. Across the room, Evelyn was still asleep. She was in the same position she'd been in when he'd laid the blanket over her, knees slightly drawn up, head tilted against the back cushion of the sectional, the cashmere blanket tucked around her in a way that suggested she hadn't moved much. The tension that had lived in her shoulders all night was gone. Her face, in sleep, was just a face. Not the face of a CEO, not the face of someone managing a grief too large to name in polite company. Just a woman, sleeping on a sofa, breathing slowly. He felt like he was looking at something he wasn't supposed to see. He got up carefully, testing each footstep on the marble floor before committing his weight, and made his way to the kitchen. He found the coffee. It took a few minutes of quiet searching through the cabinets, all of which were deep and well-organized and contained things he didn't recognize, until he found a bag of beans in the cabinet nearest the espresso machine. The espresso machine itself was the kind of equipment that looked like it belonged in a small Italian cafe and probably cost as much as a used car. He stared at it for a moment, identified the relevant buttons through the logic of trial and error, and got it running. He texted Lily, "Good morning, Bug. How'd you sleep?" The response came back in 40 seconds, which meant she had been awake for a while. "Good. Mrs. K made pancakes. When are you coming home?" "Soon. Have you said good morning to Mrs. K?" "Yes, Dad." "Good. Are you okay?" He looked at that for a moment, his 6-year-old asking him if he was okay at 6 in the morning. He typed back, "I'm good. I'll be home before lunch. Promise?" "Promise." He put his phone in his pocket and watched the espresso machine do its work. He heard her before he saw her. Footsteps in the hallway, unhurried but deliberate. The soft sound of bare feet on marble coming closer. Evelyn appeared in the kitchen doorway, blanket still around her shoulders, hair slightly flattened on one side from the sofa cushion. She looked at him, then at the espresso machine, then back at him. "You figured that out," she said. Her voice was rough with sleep. "Eventually." "Most people don't. My last assistant was afraid of it for 3 months. I have a 6-year-old. Fear is not an option I can afford." She almost smiled. She came to the island and sat down on one of the bar stools, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, and watched him without saying anything else while the machine finished. He set a cup in front of her without asking how she took it, and she picked it up and drank it black, which told him something about her that he filed away without comment. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. "Some. Maybe 3 hours. I'm sorry. I'm not." He poured his own cup. "You needed to sleep more than I needed to be comfortable." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. The morning light was coming through the kitchen windows now, the actual proper pale light of early morning, and in it she looked different from how she'd looked the night before. Not better, exactly. Not worse, just different. More human, maybe, in the way that morning has a way of stripping away the performed versions of people and leaving whatever's underneath. "I don't usually do that," she said. "Fall asleep in front of someone?" "Fall asleep anywhere that isn't my bedroom. I can't usually sleep." A pause. I don't know why last night was different. He thought he probably knew. He didn't say it. She drank her coffee. He drank his. Outside, a bird started somewhere in the garden, and then another one, and the morning sounds of the city began to build gradually around the house, the way they always do. So slowly you don't notice until suddenly there's a whole world of noise where there wasn't one before. My daughter wants me home before lunch, he said. Of course. She straightened slightly. You should go. I'm not in a rush right now. Still. She set the cup down. You've been here long enough. You've done more than I had any right to expect. Something moved across her expression. Not quite embarrassment, not quite gratitude. Somewhere in the specific territory between the two. I'm not sure I was very good company. You were fine. I cried. Not much. Enough. She picked at a loose thread on the blanket. I don't usually do that either. You mentioned. I'm mentioning it again because I want you to know that isn't something I do, with people I barely know. He looked at her steadily. Evelyn, you don't have to manage how this looks. Not this morning. She opened her mouth, closed it. The thing she'd been about to say, the deflection probably, the smooth redirection, stayed where it was. Thank you, she said instead. Simple, direct. You're welcome. Simple, direct. She almost smiled again. It didn't quite land, but it was close. His phone rang. The screen said Connor, and he held it up so she could see the name. Do you want to? He started. Answer it, she said, and something shifted in her voice, something smaller. Please. He answered. Connor. Mason. Connor's voice was tighter than usual, wired with the particular energy of someone who hadn't slept and was operating on international anxiety. Is she okay? Is she right there? Can I? She's right here. Mason set the phone on the counter between them and switched it to speaker. A brief, loaded silence. Then, Evie? Evelyn looked at the phone. Her jaw tightened just slightly, the way people's jaws tighten when they hear something that reaches them somewhere they've been protecting. Hi, she said. I've been up all night. I know, I'm sorry. Don't apologize, just, are you okay? Actually, okay, not the version of okay you tell people. She looked up, and her eyes met Mason's for a moment across the kitchen island, and he saw something in them, something complicated, something that was deciding how honest to be. I'm better than last night, she said. What happened last night? Nothing happened. It was a hard night, Connor. I've been having a lot of hard nights. Evie. His voice was very quiet. Why didn't you tell me? Because you've been in Singapore for 3 weeks dealing with the Meridian account, and I wasn't going to. I don't care about the Meridian account right now. You cared about it enough to be there for 3 weeks. That's different. How is it different? Because the Meridian account isn't my sister. Silence. Mason looked at his coffee cup. He felt, acutely, like he was standing in the middle of something very private, but leaving felt wrong too, and Evelyn hadn't looked at him the way people look at you when they want you to leave. I'm fine, she said again. Quieter now. I mean it. Mason was here all night. He stayed. A pause from Connor. He stayed? All night? He slept on the sofa. Mason. Connor's voice had changed, something rough in it. I owe you more than I know how to say. You don't owe me anything, Mason said. Call your sister more often. Yeah. A long exhale. Yeah, I will. A pause. Evie, I'm going to come home. I'm going to figure out the flight. Connor. Evelyn's voice was firm, but not cold. Finish the Meridian account. It can wait. The Meridian account can absolutely not wait. And you know that. And I know that. And you flying home early to sit with me is not. I appreciate it, but it's not what I need. A pause. What I needed was last night, and I had it. She didn't look at Mason when she said it. I'm going to call Dr. Reeves today. Another pause from Connor. You're actually going to call her? I said I would. Evie, you've said that for 3 months. I know. I'm saying it again, and this time I mean it. How do I know the difference? She exhaled through her nose. Because I'm telling you in front of a witness. Mason looked up. She was looking at him now, with that careful, measuring look, like she was using him as an anchor for something she wasn't sure she could hold to on her own. He nodded, once. All right, Connor said finally. Thursday. If I don't hear that you've called her by Thursday, I'm calling her myself. You don't have her number. I'll get it. You absolutely will not. Try me. Something in her expression loosened then. Not a full smile, but something in the neighborhood of affection, the particular exasperation of siblings. Finish the account, Connor. I love you, Evie. A beat. I love you too. The words came out quieter than everything else she'd said, with less management on them. Go to sleep. You sound terrible. I look terrible too, if that helps. It actually does. A little. Connor laughed. It was a relieved sound. Mason, seriously, thank you. Get some sleep, Mason said. The call ended. The kitchen was quiet again. Evelyn sat with both hands around her coffee cup for a moment, not saying anything. The morning light had shifted while they were on the phone, brighter now, more committed, laying a warm stripe across the counter between them. I'll call her, she said, mostly to herself. I believe you. You don't need to. I know. He finished his coffee. But I do anyway. She looked at him. For a moment, the air in the kitchen felt heavier than it should. Not uncomfortably so, just weighted with the particular gravity of two people who have spent a night being honest with each other in ways they hadn't planned on and are now facing the ordinary morning on the other side of it. Go home to your daughter, she said. He rinsed his cup in the sink, set it on the drying rack, picked up his jacket from the back of the bar stool where he'd draped it the night before. I'll call Connor when I get back, he said. Let him know you're genuinely all right. You don't have to keep doing things on my behalf. It's one phone call. He shrugged into his jacket. Not a burden. She walked him to the door herself, which she hadn't needed to do. They stood in the entryway, under the enormous chandelier, and the morning light came through the side lights on either side of the front door and made the marble floor look warmer than it actually was. Thank you, she said again. She said it like she meant it specifically, not as a social convention, but as an actual statement of fact. Take care of yourself, he said. Call the therapist. Sleep when you can. Eat something that isn't toast over the sink. A genuine laugh, then small and brief and caught off guard. You remembered that. I remember a lot. She looked at him for a moment. Then she opened the door and the full morning came in. Cool air, bird sounds, the distant sound of the city waking up. He walked to his car. He didn't look back. But he heard the door close behind him, softly, and he got into his car and sat for a moment before starting the engine and thought, all right, okay. He wasn't sure what he was saying all right and okay to exactly, but it felt like the right response to the morning. He drove home. The drive took 43 minutes. He listened to the radio low and didn't think about anything in particular, which was, after the night he'd had, a relief. Lily was waiting by the front door. She had her pajamas still on and her hair in two lopsided braids that she had evidently done herself, one higher than the other, both slightly unraveling, and she had her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. When he came through the door, she looked at him with the thorough evaluative look of a child assessing whether a parent is okay, and whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her. You look tired, she said. I am tired. Did you help your friend? I think so. A little. She nodded, processing this with the seriousness of a 6-year-old who has decided that helping people is important. Good, she said. Then, Mrs. K left more pancakes. They're in the oven. You had pancakes for breakfast and there are more? She made a lot. Mrs. Kowalski is a force of nature. What does that mean? It means we're lucky she lives next door. He picked her up, which she tolerated with the slightly put-upon dignity of a child who considers herself too old for this and does it anyway, and she tucked her head briefly against his shoulder. He held her for a second longer than necessary. Dad, she said. Yeah. You smell like someone else's house. I was in someone else's house. What did it smell like? Rich, he said, and quiet. She pulled back to look at him, considering this. Are those the same thing? Sometimes, he said, but not always. She thought about that for a moment and then wriggled down and went to get the pancakes. 3 days passed. Normal days. The ordinary machinery of a life. Mason at work running calculations, fielding emails, arguing politely with a contractor about timelines. Lily at school, then after school at Mrs. Kowalski's, then dinner and homework, and the third attempt bedtime routine. Connor texted once to say he'd spoken with Evelyn and she sounded better. Mason replied that he was glad and didn't ask anything further. He thought about her more than he'd expected to. Not in a particular way, not a way that felt loaded or significant, but in the way you think about something that has left a residue on you. The image of her handing him the coffee cup without asking. The way she'd said "I love you too" to her brother with all the management taken off it. The photograph on the shelf, the laughing woman with the reading glasses. On the fourth day, he got a text from a number he didn't have saved. It said, "This is Evelyn. I called Dr. Reeves. Appointment Thursday. I thought you should know since you were a witness." He stared at it for a moment, then typed, "Good. How are you sleeping?" A pause. Then, "Marginally better, still not great. You?" 3 hours if I'm lucky. Lily has opinions about 5 a.m. About what specifically? This morning, it was whether cartoon characters can get cold. What did you conclude? We concluded that it depends on the cartoon. Another pause, and then, "That's surprisingly reasonable." He put his phone down and went back to work. The following Tuesday, he found himself driving north again. It wasn't a crisis this time. There was no urgent call, no panicked Connor from a foreign time zone. He had finished work early, a meeting canceled, a rare, clear afternoon. And Lily had a sleepover at her friend Petra's house that she had been anticipating for approximately 2 weeks with the intensity of someone preparing for a diplomatic summit. The apartment was quiet, and the evening was in front of him without particular shape. He texted Evelyn, "Are you busy tonight? I'm in the neighborhood." Which was only partially true. He was not in the neighborhood. He was 43 minutes from the neighborhood. Her response had come back quickly. Define busy. "I have a 7 o'clock call with Tokyo that should be done by 8. I could bring food." A longer pause this time. He imagined her weighing it, the way she weighed things, the particular internal accounting of someone who has spent a long time managing who gets access to her and how much. "All right," she'd written, "but don't make it a thing." He didn't know exactly what making it a thing would look like in this context, but he understood the spirit of it. He stopped at a Thai place on the way over. Takeout, nothing elaborate. The kind of meal that comes in paper containers with plastic forks and asks nothing of either person. She let him in through the gate without him having to press the intercom twice this time. That felt like something, though he didn't examine what exactly. The house felt different in the daylight, or the early evening light, which was still a kind of gold, the late October sun cutting low through the tall windows and laying long, warm rectangles across the marble floors, less like a museum. Still large, still extremely quiet, but somehow less sealed off than it had seemed on that first night. Evelyn was in a different part of the house than he'd seen before. A study, off the main hallway, lined with bookshelves and containing a desk that was buried under a controlled chaos of papers and laptops and folders that surprised him. He'd expected meticulous organization, the same sterile precision of the other rooms. This room was worked in. This room was real. She was finishing the Tokyo call when he arrived. She waved him in with one hand, pointed to a chair near the window with the other, and continued talking in the particular voice she used for professional things. Lower, more clipped, efficient in a way that his 2 a.m. kitchen version of her wasn't. He sat and listened without meaning to, not to the content. It was mostly numbers and timeline adjustments and a name he didn't recognize recurring 3 or 4 times in a way that suggested he was a problem, but to the sound of her, the authority in it, the complete comfort with her own competence. She wrapped the call up in 10 minutes, set the phone down, and looked at him. Something in her expression shifted. The professional composure didn't drop exactly, it just adjusted, like a gear change. Sorry about that, she said. Don't be. Interesting to hear you work. What did you make of it? You said the name Hargrove 4 times with decreasing patience. Hargrove is a disaster with excellent quarterly numbers, which is the most frustrating kind of person to have to deal with. She stood, stretching slightly, and he noticed she was less formally dressed than any version of him he'd seen. Dark slacks, a plain shirt, no heels. Something about it looked less effortful. They took the food to the kitchen because the kitchen, despite being enormous, seemed to be where she naturally defaulted, and ate at the island in the easy, slightly awkward way of 2 people who don't know each other's rhythms yet, but are figuring them out. She liked the pad see ew better than the curry, which she'd requested but then pushed aside after 2 bites. He noticed without commenting. She asked him about the parking garage column, whether he'd figured out the structural problem, and he found himself explaining it in more detail than he usually bothered with, because she was actually listening and asking follow-up questions that suggested she understood load distribution better than most structural engineers' spouses. You have a background in engineering? He asked. No, but Ashcroft Industries built a residential tower in 2021, and I learned more than I wanted to about what makes a building not fall down. A pause. Our structural consultant was not the most reassuring person. In what way? In the way that the first site visit, he looked at the foundation work and said, "Huh," for about 30 seconds, and then didn't elaborate. That's bad. It was very bad. The tower is still standing, though. That's good. It's great. I need it to keep standing for at least 40 more years for the investment to make sense. He ate his curry. She moved the pad see ew around in its container. How was Thursday? He asked. Dr. Reeves. She set her fork down, thought about how to answer, which he was learning was something she did. She didn't fill space with words just to fill it. Hard, she said, and useful, both things. Did you? I'm not going to talk about it in detail, she said, not unkindly. There are things that need to stay in that room. Of course, I wasn't asking for details. You were about to ask something. I was going to ask if you're going back. She considered that for a moment, as though the question were more complicated than it sounded. Yes, she said. Next week. Good. You keep saying that. Because I keep meaning it. He met her eyes. You don't have to report to me, Evelyn. I'm glad you went. Something shifted in her expression, not quite softening, more like a recalibration, like she was still figuring out where to put him in the architecture of her life, what category he belonged in, and the categories she had were built for different kinds of people. Why did you come tonight? She asked. He thought about lying, or at least hedging. Because I had an empty evening and I didn't want to spend it alone, he said, which is probably something you understand. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. I understand that. They finished eating without drama. She made coffee, real coffee this time, from the espresso machine without him having to puzzle through it, and they ended up back in the sitting room, which he was beginning to think of as their default space, the room that felt least like a set piece and most like a place where someone might actually live. She told him more about Helen. Not the crisis version, not the grief at 2 in the morning version, but smaller things. Specific memories that had started surfacing now that she was letting herself look at them instead of working around them. The way Helen always insisted on paying for lunch but would argue about it for 10 minutes first, as though the arguing was the point. How she had once told Evelyn during a very bad quarter not to confuse a difficult season with a permanent condition, and how Evelyn had rolled her eyes at the time and then kept the phrase and repeated it to herself more times than she could count. How she smelled like a specific brand of hand lotion that Evelyn had bought a bottle of once, after, and couldn't bring herself to open. Where is it? Mason asked. The lotion? On my bathroom counter. A pause. I look at it sometimes. That's all. That's not nothing. No, she said quietly. It isn't. He told her about Sarah. Not the hard parts this time, not the loss, but the person. Sarah who laughed too loud in movie theaters and apologized for it afterward, but did it again every single time. Sarah who had been inexplicably gifted at navigating by landmarks, could find her way anywhere by remembering a blue mailbox, a bent stop sign, a house with orange shutters, but could not read a traditional map to save her life. Sarah, who had been the one to name Lily, who had wanted a name that could be serious or silly depending on the day, and had woken Mason up at 3 in the morning with Lily is the name, I know it's right, and he'd said, go to sleep, and she'd said, just trust me. And she had been exactly right. She sounds wonderful, Evelyn said. She was difficult and wonderful, he said, which is usually how that goes. Were you, she paused, choosing. Were you happy? Together? Most of the time, yeah. We had bad patches. Every marriage does, I think. Or it should. The ones that don't are the ones where nobody's being honest. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. Our worst year was actually the year before she was diagnosed. We were having a rough stretch, one of those periods where you're not fighting exactly, just distant. And then she got sick and we never got to finish the argument, whatever it was about. He shook his head. I don't even fully remember what it was about. Does that bother you? It used to. Now it just seems like one of those things where you realize the argument was never really about the thing it seemed to be about. She was watching him with the particular quality of attention she gave things when she was actually engaged, as opposed to performing engagement. He was learning to tell the difference. Do you think about being with someone again? She asked. Carefully. He thought about how honest to be. Decided to be honest. Sometimes, not actively. Lily takes up a lot of space, which is right. She should. And it's hard to imagine introducing someone into that. Not hard because I don't want to. Hard because the bar is very specific. After Sarah, I know what it's supposed to feel like, and I know what it costs to have it and lose it. A pause. That information makes you careful. Or avoidant, she said. Not accusatory, just observational, applying it to herself as much as to him. Or that, he agreed. Outside, a car passed on the street below. The sound of it came through the window like a reminder that the world existed beyond this room, which was easy to forget in here. My brother thinks I've been hiding, she said. Has he told you that? Not in those words. Connor is careful with me, which I appreciate and sometimes resent. She turned her coffee cup in her hands, mirroring the gesture he'd just made without appearing to notice she was doing it. He thinks that since Helen died, I've used the company as insulation between me and everything that might hurt. Has he said that? I said that. He agreed with it, which was worse. Because he doesn't usually agree with your self-criticism? Because he's usually quick to defend me from it. A pause. When your brother, who has defended you from everything since you were 9 years old, nods slowly instead of arguing, that lands differently. Mason said nothing. He let it land. The thing is, she continued, I know I've been doing it. I've known for months. Knowing isn't the same as stopping. She looked at the fire, which she'd turned on again out of what seemed like habit. I schedule every hour of every day so that the hours don't get empty. Because empty hours are where everything I'm not dealing with lives. And the nights, he said. And the nights. The schedule ends, and I'm here. She gestured. The same small, encompassing gesture she'd used the first night. All of this. And Helen's not on the other end of a Sunday call, and She stopped. I'm very good at being alone in rooms with other people. I have been my whole professional life. The trick is knowing how to make people feel seen while keeping yourself separate. A pause. Actual aloneness is different. It's different because you didn't choose it, he said. She looked at him. Yes. The professional version is armor. This is just being alone. Flat, honest, without self-pity. There's no strategy for it. He nodded. Didn't try to fix it or frame it or move past it. Just let it be what it was. The fire made its soft sounds. Can I show you something? She said abruptly. It startled him, the change in direction. Sure. She stood and he followed her out of the sitting room and down the hall in a direction he hadn't been. Farther back in the house, through a corridor with doors on either side, until she stopped in front of one and opened it. It was a greenhouse, or the beginning of one, a room with a glass roof and glass walls on two sides, looking out into the dark garden with growing tables running along the center and walls lined with shelving. About half the shelving had plants on it. The other half was empty. The plants that were there were in various states, some vigorous and clearly thriving, some that looked like they'd been recently repotted and were still deciding how they felt about it, a few that had clearly been struggling. The air in here was different from the rest of the house. Warmer, slightly humid, alive in a way the other rooms weren't. Helen had a garden, Evelyn said. She was standing in the doorway, not quite coming in. You mentioned the tomatoes. I used to tease her about it. All that energy going into vegetables when she could have, I don't know, done something else with it. She looked at the plants on the shelves. After she died, I had the greenhouse built, which is either a tribute or a coping mechanism, depending on the day. Why can't it be both? She looked at him. It could be. I've been afraid it was neither. What does that mean? It means I built it and then didn't know what to do with it. I hired someone to consult on the plants, and she's been coming twice a week, and I come in sometimes and look at things, but I haven't actually done anything in here myself. I stand in the doorway. She looked down at her feet, positioned precisely at the threshold. I can see that I'm standing in the doorway. He looked at her, at the doorway, at the room with its warm air and its uncertain plants. What do you think would happen if you came in, but? He asked. A silence. I think I'd have to admit that I built it because I miss her, she said. Not as a project, not as a memorial, just because I miss her. And I didn't know what else to do with that. That seems like a good reason to build something. It seems embarrassing. It's not. A greenhouse. People build all kinds of things for all kinds of bad reasons. A greenhouse for a person you loved is not a bad reason. He looked at the plants. Also, a couple of those look like they need attention. She followed his gaze to the shelving unit on the left, where two plants in terracotta pots had the particular droop of the underwatered. I know, she said. Maria keeps telling me. Come in and water them. Right now? You're already standing there. A moment. She looked at the plants, looked at her feet on the threshold, made a small private decision, and stepped into the room. She found a watering can on the shelf nearest the door and filled it from a small utility sink in the corner, and she watered the plants slowly, carefully, the way someone does when they're paying attention to what they're doing. He didn't fill the silence. He just stood near the doorway and watched, because this was something that didn't need company so much as it needed a witness. She moved through the room with the watering can, pausing to look at each plant, touching a leaf here and there to check the soil, pinching off a dead bit of something near the back corner. It took maybe 15 minutes. When she set the watering can down, her expression was quieter than when she'd picked it up. Not peaceful exactly, but settled, like something that had been circling had landed. She stood in the middle of the greenhouse and looked around. I think I'll come in tomorrow, she said, mostly to herself. Yeah, he said. The consultant left notes. I haven't read them. I should probably read them. Probably. She turned around and looked at him. Her eyes were dry and her voice was even, and something in her was still, not performed stillness, in a way he hadn't seen in either of the nights he'd spent in this house. You're good at this, she said. At what? At just... She seemed to be looking for the word. Being here. Without making it about being here. He thought about his sister, sitting in his living room after Sarah died, watching 4 hours of bad television without saying anything important. I learned it from someone, he said. They went back to the sitting room. They talked for another hour. Lighter things this time, easier things, the conversation having shed some of its weight. She told him about a restaurant she'd been to for a business dinner last week that had been genuinely terrible in a very specific and entertaining way. He told her about a contractor who had, with great confidence, installed a load-bearing wall where there was not supposed to be a load-bearing wall. She found this funnier than he expected. Around 10 o'clock, he said he should go. She didn't argue with him this time, didn't run the social calculation of whether to ask him to stay. She just nodded and walked him to the door. At the entrance, she said, Do you want to come back? Next week, maybe. I could figure out food that isn't takeout. You don't have to cook. I know I don't have to. A slight sharpening in her voice. She was good at reclaiming ground. I want to. I used to cook, actually, before. A gesture at the general enormity of her life. Before there was someone whose job it was. Okay, he said. Next week. Bring Lily if you want, if she'd be comfortable. He looked at her. She'd want to inspect everything. That's fine. She has opinions about kitchens. Most serious people do. He pulled his jacket on, opened the door. The night air came in, cold and clean, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't started yet. Good night, Evelyn. Good night, Mason. She said his name like she was still getting used to the sound of it without Connor's name attached before it. He walked to his car. The gate opened when he approached it, which meant she was watching on the camera. He didn't look back. He drove home in the dark, through the city that was still running at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. Restaurants lit up, pedestrians moving on the sidewalks, the whole ordinary ongoing business of a million lives, none of which intersected with his. 43 minutes. He listened to the radio low again, and he thought about the greenhouse and the watering can, and the way she had stood in the middle of that warm room for a moment before she came back out. He thought about how much effort it takes to be a person after a loss. The sheer daily labor of continuing, of moving through rooms, of doing the small necessary things that prove you're still here. He thought about Lily, asleep at Petra's house, probably whispering secrets to Petra's cat. He thought about the way she'd looked at him that morning, standing in the doorway with her lopsided braids, deciding he was okay. He turned onto his block and parked in front of his building and sat in the car for a moment in the particular silence of a car with the engine off before going in. His apartment was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that was familiar and his own. Lily's drawings on the fridge, her shoes beside the door, her stuffed animals occupying the corner of the couch with the air of long-term tenants. It was a small life, his, specific and worn in and his. He hung up his jacket. He went to the window and looked out at the street for a moment. Then he went to bed, and for the first time in a while he fell asleep fairly quickly and slept without interruption until Lily called him at 7 a.m. from Petra's house to ask if cartoons could get cold in winter, which was apparently not a question that had been resolved to her satisfaction. The week moved the way weeks do when something has shifted in your life, but the life itself hasn't caught up yet. Mason went to work, argued with the contractor again about the load-bearing wall situation, picked Lily up from school, made dinner, did the bedtime routine with its customary negotiations, and all of it felt both entirely normal and slightly off-center, the way a picture frame looks when it's hanging a half-inch crooked. He texted Evelyn twice. Once to confirm the following Tuesday. Once, on Thursday evening, just to ask how Dr. Reeves had gone. Her response came 40 minutes later. Better than last week. She asked about the greenhouse. I told her about going in. She seemed, cautiously optimistic is probably the phrase. He typed back, cautiously optimistic is a good place to start. It's where I usually begin negotiations, she wrote, and he could hear the dry edge in it, and he found himself smiling at his phone in the kitchen while Lily narrated a story about something that had happened at school involving a substitute teacher and a misunderstanding about the word peninsula. Dad, Lily said, are you even listening? Peninsula, he said. Yes, I'm listening. She gave him the look. The look that was entirely Sarah's. That specific narrow-eyed assessment of whether she was being handled or actually heard. Fine, he said, setting the phone down. Tell me again from the part about the map. She told him again from the part about the map. He listened. The following Tuesday, he drove north with Lily in the back seat. She had been informed that they were having dinner with a friend and had accepted this information with minimal commentary, which was unusual enough that he'd checked her temperature that morning. But she had just been thinking about it, apparently, because 20 minutes into the drive she said from the back seat, Is this the lonely friend? What? The friend you went to help, the one who was lonely. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Yeah, same friend. Okay. She looked out the window. What's her name? Evelyn. Is she nice? He thought about how to answer that honestly. She's a serious person, but yes, she's nice. Will she think I'm annoying? Why would she think you're annoying? Because sometimes adults think I ask too many questions. You do ask a lot of questions. That's how you learn things. I know, Bug. I agree with you. He changed lanes. I don't think she'll mind the questions. I think she might actually like them. Lily considered this. Does she have any kids? No. Does she have a husband? No. Does she have pets? I don't think so. That's a lot of no's. She has a greenhouse, he offered. A pause. What's a greenhouse? A room made of glass where you grow plants. The silence of a child who has been given a genuinely interesting piece of information and is now processing it. Inside, she said. Inside. A whole room? A whole room, yeah. Can I see it? We'll see. That means yes if I'm good. That means we'll see. She subsided, apparently satisfied, and looked out the window for the rest of the drive. When the gate came into view, she pressed her face to the glass and said, "Whoa," in a voice that was quiet and sincere, which was the right response. Evelyn answered the door, and Mason watched, with a kind of low-grade attentiveness, the moment she and Lily saw each other. Evelyn looked down. Lily looked up. They took each other's measure with the seriousness of two people who have both decided that first impressions matter. "You're Lily," Evelyn said. "You're Evelyn," Lily said. "Dad said you have a greenhouse." "I do. Can I see it?" "Lily," Mason started. "It's all right." Something in Evelyn's expression had changed. Not softened exactly, but opened in some way that he hadn't seen before. She stepped back from the door. "You can see it after dinner. Do you like pasta?" Lily blinked, recalibrating. "What kind?" "What kind do you like?" "The flat kind. Not tubes." "Linguine, then." "Is that the flat kind?" "It is." Lily looked at Mason. He shrugged. She stepped inside. The evening was different with Lily in it. Noisier, more uneven, punctuated by questions and observations that Evelyn handled with a patience and a straightforwardness that surprised him. She didn't talk to Lily the way some adults talk to young children, the inflated tone and simplified vocabulary. She talked to her like a smaller person with genuine opinions, which she was, and Lily responded by being approximately 30% less chaotic than usual and about twice as communicative. Evelyn cooked. She'd said she wanted to, and she had clearly meant it. The kitchen had the specific energy of someone who had prepared for something and was now managing its execution with the same focused attention she apparently gave everything. The linguine was from scratch, which Mason hadn't expected, and the sauce was simple and good, and she made it without looking at a recipe or a phone, working from what was clearly genuine memory. "You actually know how to cook," he said. "I told you I used to." "I thought you meant like pasta from a box." She looked at him. "Mason, give me some credit." Lily, sitting at the kitchen island with her chin in her hands watching the whole operation, said, "My dad burns things." "I don't burn things. You burned the grilled cheese last week." "I was distracted." "By what?" "By you asking me 17 questions while I was trying to cook." Evelyn's mouth curved. She plated the pasta without comment. They ate at the island. The dining room was large and formal, and the kind of space that makes food taste less good. And the conversation wandered through Lily's school, a recent field trip to a natural history museum that had been partly good and partly boring depending on which exhibit they were looking at, and what Evelyn's job actually involved, which Lily asked about directly. "I run a company," Evelyn said. "What does running mean? Like running?" "Like being in charge, making decisions about what the company does." "Do people do what you say?" "Mostly." "What happens if they don't?" "Then we have a conversation about why." Lily thought about this. "What if you're wrong?" Mason watched Evelyn receive this question. Most adults would have deflected it or made a joke. She didn't. "Then I say I was wrong," she said. "And we do it differently." Lily nodded, apparently satisfied. "My teacher says that's what good leaders do." "Your teacher is right." "She's pretty smart, except about peninsulas." After dinner, Evelyn took them to the greenhouse. Lily stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds and then walked directly in, which Evelyn watched with an expression that Mason could not immediately name, something quiet and complex, something that had to do with the fact that the first time Evelyn herself had gone into the room, she'd had to stand at the threshold for a long moment before stepping through. Lily went down the growing tables, touching things carefully, the way she'd been taught to touch things in museums, and asked questions about each plant she couldn't identify, which was most of them. Evelyn answered each one without impatience. There was a tomato plant near the back wall. Small, not fruiting yet, recently established, and Lily stopped in front of it and looked at it for a while. "You're growing tomatoes," she said. "I'm trying to," Evelyn said. "It's new. My grandma grows tomatoes. Hers are really big. I hope mine get there eventually." "You have to talk to them," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Grandma says plants grow better when you talk to them." Mason braced for a polite deflection. Instead, Evelyn said without irony, "I've heard that too." "Do you?" "Not yet." "You should start," Lily said, and moved on to the next plant, and Evelyn looked at Mason over the top of Lily's head with an expression he recognized, the expression of a person who has just been told something true by someone they didn't expect it from. Lily fell asleep on the drive home, which happened faster than usual. She'd spent the evening at a sustained level of interest that apparently exhausted her. Mason drove in quiet, the city passing outside, and when he pulled up in front of the apartment, he sat for a moment without waking her. He thought about Evelyn standing in the greenhouse, watching Lily walk straight in. He thought about the tomato plant. He thought, something is happening. He wasn't entirely sure what or what to do about it, or whether doing anything about it was the right move. He was a careful man by nature, careful with Lily, careful with his work, careful with the parts of his heart that he'd rebuilt slowly over 3 years, and that still had rough edges and gaps where the mortar hadn't quite set. He just thought, something is happening, and left it there, for now. He carried Lily inside. The weeks that followed arranged themselves into a pattern before he fully noticed it happening. Tuesday evenings, mostly. Sometimes with Lily, sometimes alone when she was at a friend's or with his mother for the night. He and Evelyn developed the specific shorthand of people who are getting to know each other in a real way rather than a social one. They argued about things, which he found he liked about her, the way she held a position and made him defend his own. She had strong opinions about architecture that were partially correct and partially romantic nonsense, and he told her so, and she told him his aesthetic sensibility was that of someone who had never been required to think about a room in terms of how it made people feel. They were both partly right. The arguments didn't go anywhere, which was the point of them. Connor came home at the end of October. The three of them had dinner, Connor and Evelyn and Mason, at a restaurant that Connor had chosen, and that was nicer than anywhere Mason typically went. And the evening had the slightly electric quality of a triangle of people where 2 of the sides were very old and the third was new, and everyone was working out the geometry. Connor watched Mason and Evelyn across the table with an expression that Mason caught once and couldn't fully read, something like relief and something like surprise, and something else underneath both of those that Connor, who was careful with his face, didn't let surface fully. After dinner, walking to their cars, Connor fell into step with Mason, while Evelyn went ahead to get her car from the valet. "She seems better," Connor said. "She is better." "She laughed at dinner." "She laughs," Mason said. "You just haven't been here to see it." Connor was quiet for a moment. "I know." He looked at the back of his sister's head, 30 feet ahead of them, talking on her phone while she waited. "I've been thinking about that. How long it's been going on, how much I wasn't seeing." "You were seeing it. You called me because of what you were seeing." "From Singapore." "Connor?" I know. He shook his head. "I'm just saying, I'm glad you were here." "She's done the work," Mason said. "I just showed up a few times." Connor looked at him with a look that said he didn't entirely believe that characterization, but was choosing not to argue with it. "How long have you been coming up here?" "Few weeks." "Every week?" "More or less." Connor nodded slowly. "All right," he said, in a tone that contained more than all right usually contained, but wasn't going to say the rest of it out loud. Mason appreciated that. He had enough to think about without having to have a conversation with Connor Hale about what he did or didn't feel about Connor Hale's sister. November came in cold and gray, the city pulling its coat on. Mason's firm picked up a large contract, a hospital renovation that would mean longer hours for the foreseeable future. And 2 of his Tuesdays got eaten by deadlines. He texted Evelyn both times to cancel, and both times she texted back fine, and both times the fine felt genuinely fine, rather than performed, which he decided was a good sign about where things stood. He was starting to understand that she didn't need him the way she'd needed him on that first night. That was true, and it mattered. What they were building was something different from rescue, something more like the particular kind of friendship that forms between people who have been honest with each other past the point of pretense and can't really go back to the surface version. He wasn't sure there was a name for it exactly. He wasn't sure it needed one. What he was less certain about was the thing that happened when he was leaving, sometimes. The way she stood at the door, the particular way she said goodnight, the half second that hung between the word and the door closing that felt weighted in some way he wasn't entirely prepared to examine. He was, as he'd told her, careful. He was also, underneath the carefulness, something that he recognized as not indifferent, which was its own kind of complication. The night things shifted, the night everything that had been building quietly chose to surface, was a Saturday in mid-November, and it was not a scheduled visit. It started with a phone call at 9:30 in the evening, Lily already asleep, Mason sitting at the kitchen table with a set of blueprints he'd brought home from the office spread out in front of him, Evelyn calling, not texting. That was already different. He answered. "Hey, I'm sorry to call late." Her voice was not the crisis voice of the first night, nothing like that, but tight in a specific way, contained, holding something that was pressing against the container. "It's not late," he said. "What's going on?" "Nothing is going on. That's not why I called." A pause. "I went through Helen's things today. Connor and I did it together. He came over this morning and we went through the boxes that her daughter had sent, books mostly, some personal items that Helen had wanted me to have." Another pause. "We were done by early afternoon and Connor had a thing, so he left, and I've been in the house since then, and it's been..." She stopped. "Bad?" he offered. "Not bad exactly. Just heavy. In a specific way that I can't quite..." She exhaled. "I keep picking things up." A book she annotated, reading her handwriting in the margins. She had very small handwriting and strong opinions about what writers got wrong. A small, worn sound that might have been a laugh. "I found a note she'd tucked in a copy of a business book she'd given me years ago. I don't even remember her giving it to me. The note said, for when you already know the answer, but need permission to act on it." Her voice had gotten quieter. "I'd never found it before. It was in the back cover." Mason set his pen down. "Evelyn?" "I'm fine," she said quickly. I don't need you to come over." "I know you don't need me to." A pause. "Do you want me to?" he asked. The silence on the other end was the particular silence of a person who has been asked a direct question that they can answer honestly or can manage, and is choosing. "Yes," she said. Simple. No management on it. "Give me 40 minutes, he said. He called Mrs. Kowalski, who was, as always, unrattled and efficient about the whole thing. He stood in the hallway and looked at Lily's closed door for a moment, listening to the quiet from behind it. Then he got his jacket and his keys and went. It was raining again. Not hard, a thin, steady rain that made the road shine and turned the city lights into long, smeared streaks on the pavement. He drove the familiar route on autopilot, thinking about nothing in particular except the road and the rain and the note tucked in the back cover of a book, for when you already know the answer but need permission to act on it. She was waiting for him, not at the door, but the gate was already open when he pulled in, and by the time he reached the front steps, she was opening the door. She was wearing the gray sweater again, the oversized one from the first night, which he'd come to understand was the sweater she wore when she wasn't performing anything for anyone. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You came in the rain," she said. "It's not bad rain. Still. Evelyn, I was sitting at my kitchen table doing paperwork." He came inside. "I would have driven in a blizzard." Something moved across her face at that. She looked away before he could read it fully. "I put tea on," she said. They went to the kitchen. The boxes were on the dining room table, so he could see them through the open doorway as they passed. Brown cardboard, neat stacks of books visible in the top one, and something else that might have been a framed photograph face down at the edge. He didn't mention them. He followed her to the kitchen and sat at the island while she got the tea. She put a mug in front of him and stood on her side of the island with her own, and for a while neither of them said anything, which was fine. The rain on the windows, the tea getting less hot. "Tell me about the annotations," he said eventually. She looked up. "What?" "The book. The one she wrote in. What did she say?" Evelyn looked at her mug. Then she set it down and left the kitchen and came back a minute later with a book. Old paperback, the kind that's been read so many times the spine is soft, with pencil marks visible on the edges of pages that had been turned down at the corners. She set it on the island in front of him, and he opened it somewhere in the middle. The handwriting was, as Evelyn had described, small and dense. Not neat exactly, but very deliberate. The handwriting of someone who wrote a lot and had developed an efficient private script. The margins were crowded with it. A passage had been underlined and beside it in pencil, true for businesses, also for people, also for gardens. Another page. Someone had written 3 question marks next to a paragraph and then, "He's describing his own failure here and doesn't know it." Interesting. She was competitive, Evelyn said from across the island, watching him read. There was something in her voice, not quite a smile, but the memory of one. She never stopped being competitive. Even reading, she was arguing with the person. Sounds exhausting. She was exhausting, in the best way. Evelyn traced a finger along the edge of the book without touching the pages. She made you feel like your ideas were worth arguing about, like she'd only bother to push back on something she thought deserved it. "You miss that specifically," he said, "the arguing." "I miss someone who thought my ideas were worth the effort." She said it quietly, without self-pity, just as a fact. "I have good people around me, smart people. But in a professional context, there's always a layer of people are careful with you when you're the one who signs the checks, even when they're not trying to be." A pause. Helen never cared who signed the checks. "Neither does Lily," he said. Evelyn looked up, and then she laughed. An actual laugh. Surprised out of her, genuine and warm and slightly undone, and it crossed her face and changed it, and he saw in it the woman from the photograph on the shelf, the one with the reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, caught mid-laugh at something outside the frame. He felt, in that moment, with a clarity that wasn't entirely comfortable, exactly how not indifferent he was. She stopped laughing and looked at him, and something changed in the room. Subtle, like a pressure shift, the way the air feels just before weather decides what it's going to do. "Mason," she said. "Yeah. Can I show you the note, the one from the back cover?" "Sure." She left and came back with the other book. Newer, business-focused, the kind of thing that has an important-sounding subtitle and a photograph of the author on the back, looking thoughtful. She opened the back cover and handed it to him. The note was on a small square of paper, folded once. He unfolded it. Helen's handwriting again, smaller and more careful than the margin notes, as though she'd taken more time with this. For when you already know the answer but need permission to act on it, you've always known. You just don't trust it yet. Trust it. H. He read it twice. Then he folded it carefully back the way it had been and put it in the back cover and handed the book across the island to Evelyn. She was watching him. "What was she giving you permission for?" he asked. "When she wrote it?" "I don't know. I don't know when she wrote it or put it there." Her fingers closed around the edge of the book. "But reading it today, I think she might have known that someday I'd need it for something she didn't anticipate." He looked at her. She looked at him. The pressure in the air didn't shift. "What do you already know the answer to?" he asked quietly. A long pause. The rain. The tea going cold. "I don't know if I should say it," she said. "Because you're not sure of the answer?" "Because I'm sure of it," she said, "and saying it out loud makes it real, and real things can go wrong." He felt the words land in the specific place where they were aimed. He wasn't going to pretend they hadn't. "Yeah," he said, "they can." I'm not good at this," she said. I should tell you that. I'm good at a lot of things. This isn't one of them. I don't. She stopped, tried again. I've been very good at keeping a distance for a long time. From most things. From people. And you've been. She looked at the book in her hands. You've been very difficult to keep a distance from. He said nothing. He let her have the space to finish what she was saying. And I don't know what to do with that, she said. Because you have a life. You have Lily and work, and you've already lost someone and rebuilt yourself, and I'm still in the middle of rebuilding, and I don't know how much of what I feel right now is actually what I feel, and how much of it is just, she made a frustrated gesture, just the fact that you stayed. Those things aren't mutually exclusive, he said. She looked up. You can be grateful I stayed and also feel something real, he said. One doesn't cancel the other. How do you know the difference? I don't entirely. I'm not sure you ever do, fully. He looked at his hands on the island. I know that you annoy me sometimes, which isn't something I feel toward people I'm only grateful to. I know that when you make a point I disagree with, I actually want to argue about it instead of just nodding. I know that you laughed at my contractor story for approximately 30 seconds longer than it deserved. He paused. I know I drove here in the rain without thinking about it. She was very still. I'm also careful, he said. I want to be honest with you about that. I have a 6-year-old who matters more than anything, and I move slowly, and I have things in me that are still not entirely sorted out from before. He looked at her. So if what you're telling me is that you feel something and you're afraid of it, I understand that. I'm not going to push. I'm just saying you don't have to pretend you don't feel it to protect me from the decision. She looked at him for a long moment. That measuring look, the one he'd gotten used to, the one that meant she was deciding how much to trust what she was seeing. I'm going to say something, she said, and I need you to not make it into more than I can handle right now. Okay. I think I'd like to find out, she said, what this is, carefully, without it being a thing, to use the phrase from a month ago, the faintest edge of something wry. I think I'd like to find out slowly and carefully, with the full understanding that I am a person who has a lot to figure out and who is bad at being vulnerable and who will probably handle it imperfectly approximately 80% of the time. He nodded. That's a higher percentage than I'd set for most people. It's honest. I know. That's why I'm not arguing with it. She looked at him. He looked at her. The pressure in the air resolved into something that wasn't certainty, but was the particular kind of peace that comes with honesty. The relief of having said the true thing, and had it received as true. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she picked up her tea, which was completely cold by now, and made a face at it, and he almost said something and then didn't, and she caught him almost saying something. What? She said. I was going to make a joke about the tea. What kind of joke? The kind where I point out that we've now had 2 conversations of significant personal consequence over completely cold drinks. She looked at her mug, looked at his. That's less a joke and more an observation. I'm an engineer. Observations are what I've got. She got up and put both mugs in the microwave, which made him laugh, because somehow it was the most practical and unglamorous response to the moment. And it was exactly right. She brought them back, and he drank reheated tea in a kitchen that cost more than his car, and she stood across from him with her hands around her mug, and they were both quiet for a little while. And the quiet was the comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Later, it was past midnight when he finally left, not because of any single thing that kept him, but because the conversation moved in the way good conversations do. One thing becoming another, Evelyn talking about the boxes and what it had been like going through them with Connor, the specific grief of handling objects that had belonged to someone, how a book that Helen had touched 100 times felt different from a book that hadn't been touched. Mason talking about going through Sarah's things, the particular thing that had undone him. Not the clothes, not the photographs, but a grocery list in her handwriting on a notepad on the fridge, the ordinary future of a Tuesday she never got to. I kept it, he said, for a long time. It's not on the fridge anymore, but I know where it is. You should keep it, Evelyn said. I'm not going to throw it away. Good. At midnight, she walked him to the door, and they stood in the entryway in the usual configuration, and he put his jacket on, and she held the door open, and the rain had mostly stopped, just a light mist now that caught the porch light. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You called. I came." "You didn't have to." "I know." He looked at her. "I'm going to keep knowing that and keep showing up anyway, if that's all right." Something in her face, a visible thing, a softening that she didn't immediately manage. "That's all right," she said. He went down the steps. The gate was open. He got in his car and sat for a moment in the dark with the engine off, watching the rain mist through the headlights, and he felt, it was hard to name it exactly. Not happy, quite. Not afraid. Something more complicated and quieter than either of those. Something that felt like standing at the edge of a thing and knowing it was real and deciding that real, even with all its attendant risk, was what he'd been looking for. He drove home. It took 43 minutes. He let himself into the apartment, checked on Lily, sound asleep, rabbit tucked under her arm, a small snore she claimed not to make, and stood in her doorway for a moment before pulling it shut. He went to his room. He picked up the photograph from the dresser. Him and Sarah, from before Lily, from a trip to the coast they'd taken when they were still the kind of people who took coast trips on a whim. He looked at it for a while. He set it back down carefully, in its place. He lay down in the dark and thought about a note tucked in the back of a book. "You've always known. You just don't trust it yet. Trust it." He thought. "All right," he thought. "Okay." He turned over and closed his eyes, and outside the city was doing what cities do. All that noise, all those lives, and somewhere to the north, in a large quiet house, a woman he was learning sat in the kitchen with a mug of hot tea and a book full of marginal notes and talked quietly to a tomato plant in a glass room. He slept. The thing about moving slowly, Mason discovered, was that it required a different kind of attention than moving fast. Moving fast was easy. You just followed momentum, let the current take you, figured out where you'd landed afterward. Moving slowly meant you had to keep choosing. Every week, every conversation, every small decision about how much space to take up in someone else's life. It was more work. It was also, he thought, more honest. December came in the way December does in the city. Abruptly, the temperature dropping 15 degrees over a weekend as though someone had thrown a switch. The trees on the north side street stripped bare by the first real wind, the storefront windows beginning their slow accumulation of lights and decorations. Mason's hospital renovation project went into its intensive phase, which meant longer hours and a general state of low-grade exhaustion that he managed with coffee and the specific discipline of a man who has learned that being tired is not the same as being unable to function. He and Evelyn had established, without formally discussing it, a rhythm that suited them both. Tuesdays when possible, Saturday evenings when Lily had plans and the project allowed. Texts between the ordinary back and forth of two people sharing the texture of their days. Him, contractor moved the HVAC without telling anyone. My eye is twitching. Her. Hargrove missed a quarterly deadline. My eye has been twitching since September. Small things, but the accumulation of small things is how you come to know a person. What they hadn't done, not since the night of the boxes and the note and the cold tea, was address directly what they'd said to each other. Not because either of them had forgotten it, more because they'd agreed without saying so to let it exist as a fact rather than a project. Something true that didn't need to be managed or scheduled or optimized. Evelyn was, by her own admission, a person who managed things, and Mason had watched her apply that impulse to every domain of her life, and had quietly decided that this particular thing should be allowed to develop in whatever organic and imperfect way it chose. She was still seeing Dr. Reeves, every week, Thursday afternoons. She didn't talk about what happened in those sessions in detail, but he could measure the effect of them in other ways. The quality of her sleep, which she updated him on with the specificity of someone who has been asked to track it by a therapist. The frequency with which she entered the greenhouse, which had gone from twice a week to daily, sometimes twice daily. The small but real changes in how she talked about Helen, the grief shifting from something that sealed her off to something she carried more openly. She was talking to the tomato plant. She told him this one Tuesday evening in early December, briefly, while making coffee, in the tone of someone disclosing something mildly embarrassing. Lily told you to, he said. Lily is 6. Lily is also right, apparently. The plant does seem to be doing better. She handed him his coffee. I'm not saying it's causal. What do you say to it? She gave him a look. I'm not telling you that. Why not? Because it's private. You're talking to a plant. I'm talking to a plant about private things. She sat across from him. That's different. He let it go, smiling into his coffee. Lily had appointed herself something between an inspector and an ambassador in their arrangement. She asked about Evelyn with the casual regularity of someone checking on a project she'd invested in. Did Evelyn's tomatoes grow yet? Did you tell her what I said about the water? Does she know that overwatering is also bad? She'd apparently done research, which was how Lily approached things she found interesting. Mason relayed the information faithfully, and Evelyn received it with a seriousness that he found quietly moving. Your daughter sent me a care schedule, Evelyn told him one evening, showing him her phone. It was a photograph of a handwritten chart, Lily's large, effortful handwriting, slightly uphill on the page, titled Plant Care for Evelyn, with days of the week and specific instructions that included, don't forget to talk to them. This is important. When did she do this? He asked. She texted it to me last Sunday. You have her number? She asked Connor for mine. She told him she needed it for important plant business. Evelyn looked at the chart on her phone. I've been following it. He looked at her. She said it without particular emphasis, just as a fact, but he heard what was underneath it. The thing Lily had done without trying or knowing she was doing it, which was give Evelyn a small, non-threatening reason to be accountable to something outside herself. The care schedule. Something to follow. Something that existed in her life because a 6-year-old had decided it should. She's going to be insufferable when the tomatoes actually grow, he said. She deserves to be. Evelyn was still looking at the chart. She'll be right. The first real test of what they were building came on a Wednesday in the second week of December, and it came from a direction Mason hadn't anticipated. He'd picked Lily up from school, and she'd been quiet in the car, which was unusual enough that he noticed immediately. Lily was many things, opinionated, relentless, curious to the point of exhaustion, but quiet was not typically in her register. She sat in the back seat with her bag on her lap and looked out the window, and when he asked her how her day was, she said fine in the specific tone that meant it had not been fine. He didn't push. He got her home, got her a snack, and sat with her at the kitchen table while she ate, and eventually, in the sideways way of children who don't want to have a conversation but need to, it came out. There had been a project at school, a family project. Draw your family. Describe the people in it. Lily had drawn Mason and herself and Mrs. Kowalski and his mother and her teacher, who was well-meaning and possibly not thinking carefully enough about the architecture of other people's families, had said, "And where's your mom?" in front of the class, in front of everyone. Lily told him this in a very flat, contained voice that was the voice she used when she was trying not to cry and had decided against it. "What did you say?" he asked. "I said she died when I was little." A pause. And then everyone looked at me. "I'm sorry, Bug." "I don't care," she said, in the tone that meant she cared quite a bit. "I know she died. I just didn't want everyone to look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm sad. I'm not sad right now. I was just doing a project." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She let him. "The teacher said sorry afterward," Lily said. "She felt bad, I could tell." "She probably did." "It's okay. She didn't know." A pause. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." She looked at her snack, not at him. "Are you ever going to get married again?" He was quiet for a moment. It was a question she'd asked before, once about a year ago, and he'd said he didn't know, and she'd accepted that. But something about today had brought it up with more weight on it. "I don't know when," he said again. "Honestly." "Because of Mom?" "Partly, and because the right person is... It's complicated, Lily. I'd need to be really sure, and whoever it was would need to love you, not just be okay with you." She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Does Evelyn love me? He was not prepared for this question, delivered flatly over a half-eaten apple. She cares about you, he said carefully. You're still getting to know each other. She uses my plant schedule, Lily said. She sends me pictures of the plants. He hadn't known about the pictures. She does? Yeah, she started last week. She says which ones are doing well and which ones aren't, and she asks me what to do. Lily looked at him now. I think she trusts me. I think so too. Lily nodded, processing. I like her, she said simply. She talks to me like I'm a real person. You are a real person. Some adults don't act like it. She finished her apple and pushed the core to the side. You should keep going to see her. I plan to. Good. She slid off the chair and picked up her bag. I have homework. She went to her room and Mason sat at the kitchen table for a while after, with the specific weight of a conversation that has told you something you needed to know. He texted Evelyn that evening. I hear you've been sending plant updates. Her response? She asked for them. She has opinions. She does. She told me she thinks you trust her. A longer pause than usual. Then, she's right. Another pause. Then, how is she? You mentioned she had a hard day. He hadn't mentioned it in that text. He'd mentioned it 2 days ago, in a brief conversation that he'd thought was about logistics. She'd remembered. Better now, he wrote. She asked me if I was ever going to get married again. What did you say? Honest answer was, I don't know. That's the right answer. She also said she likes you. In case you wanted to know. The pause this time was the longest. Then, tell her the tomatoes are doing better. She'll know what that means. He read it twice and then set his phone face down on the counter and stood in his kitchen in the quiet of a Wednesday evening with Lily doing homework behind a closed door and the city doing its ordinary thing outside. And he thought about the particular arithmetic of a life, what you carry from before, what you make room for now, how those two things negotiate with each other. He thought he was not undecided. He'd been telling himself he was undecided because undecided felt safer than decided, but the truth was that he had more or less known since the night in the greenhouse when she'd stepped through the door, and probably before that, and what he'd been doing since wasn't deciding but getting comfortable enough with the decision to act on it. He picked up his phone. He typed, "Come to dinner at our place Saturday. Not a restaurant. Lily wants to cook." A short pause. Then, Lily wants to cook? She's been wanting to try a recipe for 2 weeks. Something she saw online. I've been afraid to let her try it unsupervised. What's the recipe? She won't tell me. She says it's a surprise and that she needs a real audience. A longer pause. He imagined Evelyn reading this in her office or her study, in some corporate context, and smiling at her phone the way people smile when they don't mean to. All right, she wrote. Saturday. Saturday arrived with the chaos specific to Lily attempting to cook, which Mason had braced for and still underestimated. The recipe turned out to be a pasta dish, not linguine, something different with a butter and herb sauce that was, in theory, simple, and in practice involved Lily standing on a step stool to reach the stove and narrating every step loudly while Mason stood 2 feet away trying to be useful without being intrusive. The kitchen smelled good by 5 o'clock, which was more than he'd expected. Evelyn arrived at 6 with wine that she'd selected herself and a small paper bag from a bakery that turned out to contain a lemon tart she'd had someone recommend, and she came in and stood in the hallway of Mason's apartment and looked around with an expression he couldn't immediately name. He watched her take it in, the drawings on the fridge, the shoes by the door, the organized disorder of a home that was small and lived in and specific to the people who lived in it. It's smaller than I thought, she said, not critically, just as an observation. It fits us, he said. She nodded. She meant it. He could tell she was genuinely absorbing the difference. This space versus hers, the contrast not of money, but of texture, of the particular kind of warmth that comes from 2 people building a life in the same rooms. Lily emerged from the kitchen wearing the apron Mason's mother had given her, which was adult-sized and dragged on the floor. She looked at Evelyn with the appraising expression that she'd apparently decided was appropriate for important guests. "Did you check the plants this morning?" she said. I did, Evelyn said without missing a beat. The basil is struggling. I know, I told you it needed more light. I moved it to the south window. Lily nodded, satisfied. Good. Come look at what I'm making. Evelyn followed her to the kitchen, and Mason stood in the hallway for a moment watching them go. The 6-year-old in the enormous apron walking ahead, the billionaire CEO following dutifully, and felt something in his chest that wasn't easy to name, but was not, he thought, nothing. Dinner was imperfect and good. The pasta was slightly overcooked and the sauce was slightly oversalted, and Lily announced both these facts herself before anyone else could, which was the kind of honest self-assessment that Mason had been trying to cultivate in her for years and was pleased to see deployed in public. Evelyn ate with evident genuine appetite and said the sauce had good flavor, which was true, and that the herbs were well balanced, which was also true. What herb did you use? Evelyn asked. Thyme and parsley, Lily said, and some basil, but not too much. Basil is strong. Where did you learn that? The internet. And also I asked you in one of our texts. Evelyn looked at her. You asked me about basil? Last Tuesday. I said, how much basil is too much? And you said more than you think. I remember. I thought you were asking about something else. Why? Because I didn't know you were planning to cook. Lily seemed to find this funny. She giggled, which she immediately tried to suppress, which made it worse. I was already planning, she said. I just needed expert advice. I'm not a culinary expert. You said you know about basil. I know about the basil in my greenhouse. Same basil, Lily said firmly. Evelyn looked at Mason. He raised his hand slightly. I don't get involved in herb debates, he said. After dinner, Lily showed Evelyn her room with the thorough property tour energy of someone who is proud of their space and wants it properly appreciated. Evelyn stood in the doorway of Lily's room and looked at the drawings on the wall, a lot of drawings, crayon and marker, and the occasional ambitious watercolor, and the books arranged by some system Mason had never fully decoded, and the collection of stuffed animals occupying their designated corner with the gravity of an established institution. Who's that? Evelyn asked, pointing to the rabbit. Clover, Lily said. She's the oldest. How old? Since I was 2. She's missing an eye, but that's okay. Because? Lily looked at her. Because she's still Clover. A beat. Evelyn looked at the rabbit, small and threadbare and one-eyed in the corner. That's true, she said. Mason, leaning in the hallway, heard that exchange and said nothing, and filed it somewhere. They ended up in the living room after, Lily between them on the couch with extraordinary inevitability, as though she had planned the seating arrangement, which Mason suspected she had, watching a movie that Lily selected and that turned out to be an animated film about a bear who discovers music, which Lily had seen 4 times and which she narrated quietly under her breath, slightly ahead of the dialogue, in a way that should have been annoying and was mostly charming. Evelyn sat beside her with her wine and watched the movie with a quality of attention that Mason noticed from across the couch. She was actually watching it, not tolerating it, not being politely present. The story of the bear got to her in some small way, which she didn't remark on, but which showed in her face, and Lily, who was perceptive about people in ways that went beyond what her age seemed to warrant, pressed slightly closer to Evelyn's side about 40 minutes in, as though she'd felt a shift and wanted to account for it. Evelyn looked down at her. Lily looked up. Neither of them said anything. Lily looked back at the movie. After the film, Mason put Lily to bed. The negotiation was shorter than usual, either because she was tired from cooking or because she was in an unusually cooperative mood, which happened unpredictably and should never be questioned. He came back to the living room and Evelyn was standing at the window, looking out at the street, her wineglass in her hand. She heard him come in and said, without turning around, "She put herself against me." "On the couch?" "Yeah. She just decided to." She turned from the window. Like it was perfectly natural. To her, it probably was. She looked at him. Something in her face that was open in the way faces are after an evening of genuine rather than managed experience. "That bear movie made me cry a little," she said. "I wasn't expecting that." "I know, I saw." "Was it obvious?" "Only because I was watching. She looked at the window. The part where he thinks he has to choose between the music and the life, because he's convinced he can't have both. A pause. I've made that decision too many times, choosing the work because the work felt like the only thing I was certain about. And now? She looked at him across the living room, and the question sat in the air between them for a moment without needing an immediate answer. Now I'm less certain about certainty, she said, which was not a full answer, but was, he thought, an honest one. He walked her to the door at 10:30. She put on her coat, picked up the bakery bag that they'd forgotten about and left on the counter, and stood in the hallway of his apartment building under the slightly flickering overhead light that had needed replacing for 3 months. This was good, she said. Yeah. Lily is going to want a report on the basil. I'll make sure she sends you one. She looked at him. He looked at her. The hallway light flickered again. Mason. She said his name with a specific weight. I want to tell you something. Okay. I've been thinking about what I said last month about finding out what this is, carefully. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, a small fidgeting motion that he'd come to understand was what she did when she was working through something. I've been thinking that carefully sometimes becomes an excuse to not actually move. Yeah, he said. I know about that. And I don't want to do that. I have enough things I've been avoiding. I don't want this to become one of them. He looked at her. She looked back, and in the uncertain light of the hallway, she looked exactly like a person making a decision, not managing one. Real and uncertain and not performing anything. Okay, he said. Then don't. She stepped forward and kissed him. Once, brief, deliberate, the kind of kiss that is a clear statement rather than an accident. Then she stepped back and looked at him with that evaluative look, checking the result. He said, Okay. She said, Okay. The flickering light settled. She went down the stairs. He stood in the hallway until he heard the street door close, and then he went back inside and stood in his kitchen and looked at the lemon tart on the counter that they'd completely forgotten again, and felt the specific quality of a thing that has been potential for a long time and has just become actual. The week after that, Evelyn did something she hadn't done in almost a year. She canceled her Sunday. Not the whole day. She was still in the office by 8, still ran 3 calls before noon, still made 3 decisions that needed making, and sent 12 emails that needed sending. But at 12:30 she stopped. She closed her laptop. She told her assistant she was unavailable for the afternoon, which her assistant received with a visible effort not to express surprise. And she drove across the city to a neighborhood she hadn't visited in a long time, to a house with a blue front door and a garden that was bare in December, but still had the organized shape of something that had been tended carefully. Helen's daughter Margot opened the door. She was 53, practical looking, with her mother's directness in her face and her eyes. She looked at Evelyn for a moment. I thought you might come eventually, Margot said. I'm sorry it took so long. Come in, I'll make tea. She came in. The house smelled slightly of old paper and something herbal that Evelyn recognized without being able to name. Some specific combination of things that had been there for decades and had become the smell of the house itself, the smell of all those accumulated Sundays. They sat in the kitchen, small, worn in, with a window that looked out on the garden. And Margot made tea and they talked about Helen for 2 hours. The real version of her, not the eulogy version. The difficult parts too, the stubbornness, the specific way she had of withdrawing when she was hurt and how infuriating that had been. The decision Margot still disagreed with that Helen had made about the house years ago, the joke she'd made the last time Margot had seen her that was terrible in the way only Helen's jokes were. Evelyn talked about the Sunday calls, about the 11 years of them, about finding the note. Margot listened. Then she said, She talked about you more than you probably know. What did she say? She said you were going to be fine, that you were the kind of person who would figure it out, just slower than you wanted to. A pause. She also said you were terrible at asking for help. She wasn't wrong. She rarely was. Margot wrapped her hands around her cup. She worried about you being alone, not professionally, just alone. Evelyn looked at the garden through the window. The bare December garden, all structure and no color. the bones of what it would be in spring. "I'm less alone than I was," she said. "Good," Margot said simply. She drove home in the late afternoon, the city going golden in the low winter light, and she sat in the car in her own driveway for a few minutes before going inside. She thought about Helen in the kitchen with the herb smell in the small window, and about Margot saying she talked about you more than you probably know, and about what it means to be known by someone, to be seen in the specific way that takes time and attention and the willingness to look. She thought about a man who drove 43 minutes in the rain. She went inside. She changed into the gray sweater. She went to the greenhouse and stood in it for a while, not doing anything particular, just being in the room. The warm air, the smell of soil and green things, the small tomato plant now fuller than it had been, the basil that had been moved to the south window and was, she thought, doing incrementally better. She talked to the plants for a while. She wasn't going to tell Mason what she said. Then she came back inside and sat at her desk and opened a document she'd been building for 2 weeks. Not a business document, not a financial model, nothing that belonged to the company. It was a list of ideas. Some of them were half-formed, some more concrete. A mentorship program structured the way Helen would have structured it. Not prestigious or exclusive, not designed for people who already had every advantage, but for women who were where Evelyn had been at 22, smart and capable, and without a single person in their corner who had the kind of access that changed outcomes. A community initiative attached to one of the company's urban properties, turning unused commercial space into something that served the neighborhood rather than just occupying it. A fund, small initially, directed specifically at organizations Helen had cared about. Urban gardening programs, adult literacy, practical things that didn't have glamorous branding. She'd been building the list slowly, adding to it in the spaces between meetings, on Thursday evenings after Dr. Reeves, on Sunday mornings when the quiet wasn't empty anymore, but had a different quality. Reflective rather than painful. She hadn't shown it to anyone. She wasn't sure when she would, but it existed, which was a start. The evening of the Thursday before Christmas, Connor came for dinner. Just the two of them. At the house. With food Evelyn cooked herself. Not pasta, something more ambitious. A lamb dish from a recipe she'd found in one of Helen's books, annotated in the margin with needs more time than she says. Don't rush. It took longer than the recipe said. She didn't rush. They ate at the kitchen island, which was where she ate now when it was just people she was comfortable with, and Connor ate with the focused appreciation of a man who has been eating hotel food for 2 months and is glad of a real meal. He asked about the company. She answered. He told her about Singapore, the resolution of the Meridian account, the next trip that was already scheduled for January. She listened. And then, between the main and the dessert that neither of them needed, Connor said, "Are you going to tell me about Mason?" She looked at him. "What about Mason? Come on, Evie." "I don't know what you want me to say." "I want you to say whatever's true." He rested his arms on the island. "I want to know if you're okay, if it's good, if I should be—" He paused. "I'm not going to say anything about it except that he's a good man. You know I think that. I just want to know that you know what you're doing." "I never know what I'm doing," she said. "That's different from not doing it." Connor looked at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough." "He's careful," she said. "With me. Not in a way that's protective. In a way that respects that I know my own edges." She looked at her plate. "He doesn't try to fix things. He shows up. That's different from what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something that felt more like being handled." She picked up her fork. "He argues with me." "Does he win?" "Sometimes. Not about everything." She almost smiled. "He thinks my ideas about architecture are romantic nonsense." "To be fair, don't." Connor held up his hands. But he was smiling. The particular smile of a brother who is genuinely relieved. A smile that has specific knowledge behind it. All those phone calls from Singapore. All the worry that had accumulated over months of watching his sister from a distance and not being able to do enough. The smile of someone who can exhale now, at least partially. "Good," he said. "That's good, Evie. Don't make it into a thing." "I'm not." I'm just good. He picked up his fork. This lamb is excellent, by the way. Helen's recipe. She said don't rush it. Connor was quiet for a moment. Then, you made her recipe. It seemed like the right thing to do. He looked at his plate and didn't say anything else about it, which was the right response, and she appreciated him for it. Christmas that year was smaller than usual for Mason. His mother came for 3 days, which was good, and Lily was incandescent with the particular excitement of a child who has been anticipating something for weeks and is now living inside it. On Christmas Eve, after his mother had gone to bed and Lily was allegedly asleep, but almost certainly wasn't, Mason sat in the living room in the dark with the tree lights on and called Evelyn. She answered on the second ring. Still awake? Lily's still awake. I can feel it through the ceiling. Is she okay? This time of year without... She's good, he said. She misses Sarah. She says it in the matter-of-fact way she has. But she's good. A pause. She asked if she could call you tomorrow. A beat. She asked you? She asked me if it would be okay. I told her to ask you herself, but she wanted to check with me first. She can call me tomorrow, Evelyn said. Her voice had the quality it got sometimes, careful and open at the same time, the two things coexisting in a way they hadn't when he first met her. How are you? He asked. Tonight. Better than last year, she said, which was an honest answer rather than a good one, but it was the right kind of honest. Connor came today. We exchanged gifts. He gave me a gardening book, which I choose to interpret as supportive rather than tactical. Is it a good book? I don't know yet. I read the first chapter. It's very serious about soil composition. Lily will want to hear about the soil composition. I assumed. I made notes. He laughed, leaned back in the chair, the tree lights throwing small colored spots across the ceiling, the apartment quiet around him except for the very distant sound of Lily definitely still being awake upstairs. I wanted to say something, he said. Okay. This year has been... It's been a good year mostly, even with the hard parts. A pause. Having you in it has been part of that. I wanted to say that out loud. A silence, not an empty one. I wanted to say it back, she said. They stayed on the phone for a while after that, not talking about anything specific. She told him more about the gardening book. He told her about the thing Lily had said at dinner that he was still processing. And at some point the quality of the quiet changed, and he realized she'd fallen asleep on the other end. Not dramatically, just... The pauses had gotten longer, and then there were no more words. He said, "Good night, Evelyn." Nothing. Just the sound of someone sleeping. He held the phone for a moment. Then he hung up and sat in the chair a little longer, with the tree lights and the quiet, and the city outside doing its late December thing. Somewhere in the house above him, Lily stopped pretending to be asleep. He could hear the specific stillness of a child who has actually gone under, the particular quality of a house that is simply resting now, without effort. He turned the tree lights off and went to bed. In January, on a gray Tuesday after the new year had arrived and taken with it the specific pressure of December, Evelyn called a meeting. Not a business meeting. She had those constantly, all day, every day. This was different. She called her assistant, her CFO, and the head of the company's community partnerships division into a room, and she put the document on the screen. The list that had been building since November, now organized and annotated and real. And she said, "I want to build this. Tell me what it would take." The CFO said it was ambitious. She said, "I know. Tell me what it would take." They talked for 3 hours. At the end of it, there was a framework. It wasn't finished. It would take months to develop properly. Legal review, board conversation, all the machinery of turning an intention into an institution. But it was started. It existed in a room with other people now, which meant it was no longer only hers to abandon. She texted Mason afterward. "I did something today." "Good something?" "I think so." "Scary something." Those are usually the same thing. A pause. Then, Helen would have argued with every line item for an hour and then said it was exactly right. He read it twice. Then, "That sounds like the highest compliment." "It is," she wrote. "It absolutely is." February arrived the way February always does, without ceremony, gray and cold and slightly tedious, the month that exists purely as a test of endurance between the drama of January and the first uncertain warmth of March. Mason had long since stopped romanticizing February. It was a month you got through, not a month you enjoyed, and he approached it accordingly. Head down, work steady, Lily managed, one day at a time. The hospital renovation was in its final intensive phase, which meant he was at the site by 7 most mornings and not always home before Lily's bedtime, which required the logistical machinery of Mrs. Kowalski and his mother and a school pickup rotation that he'd organized with the precision he normally reserved for load calculations. He was tired in the specific way of someone running at full capacity and aware that the capacity is finite. He didn't complain about it. It was his life, and he'd chosen it, and the work was genuinely good, the kind of project that would outlast him in a real way. Evelyn's initiative, she'd started calling it the Helen Ashcroft Foundation in the internal documents, which had been Connor's suggestion and which she'd initially resisted and then accepted with the quiet recognition that it was right, was deep in its development phase. The legal structure was being built. The board was being assembled carefully, with the same rigor she applied to anything she actually cared about. She'd identified a building, a former warehouse in the east part of the city that one of her company's real estate holdings included, and that had been sitting dormant for 2 years. Good bones, she'd said, in the exact way he'd taught her without knowing he was teaching her. And the architecture firm she'd hired had just delivered preliminary plans. She sent him the plans on a Tuesday, not for any professional reason. She had a structural engineer on the project, a good one, but because she wanted to show him. He looked at them on his phone, zoomed in on the details, texted back a question about the load-bearing configuration on the 3rd floor that she couldn't answer but forwarded to the engineer, who apparently appreciated the catch. "You reviewed them," she texted. Force of habit. "You found something, minor. The engineer has it." A pause. "Thank you. You don't have to thank me for looking at plans. I'm not thanking you for the plans." He read that twice and put his phone in his pocket and went back to the site. The first Sunday in February, Evelyn drove herself to Margot's house again. She'd been going monthly since December, not on a rigid schedule, just when it felt right, when the pull toward that blue door and that kitchen with the herb smell became strong enough to act on. Margot had started texting her occasionally, small things, a photograph of the garden beginning its slow return, a funny thing that had happened at Margot's book club, once a terrible pun that was unmistakably Helen's construction recycled through Margot's memory. That Sunday they walked in the garden, which was still technically winter but showing the first preliminary signs of intention. Small green things at the base of the rose canes, a crocus pushing up near the back wall with the stubborn optimism specific to crocuses, the skeletal frame of the vegetable beds waiting. "She would have been out here already," Margot said. "This time of year she'd be down on her knees in the mud deciding where things went. I know, she always said February was when you planned, and March was when you started, but she never actually waited until March." Margot laughed. Helen's laugh, or near enough to it that Evelyn felt the specific bittersweet sensation of being given something back that you thought was gone. She didn't believe in waiting when she'd already made up her mind, Margot said. No, she didn't. They stood in the gray February garden for a while, comfortable in the silence the way people become when they've known each other long enough that silence doesn't require management. She would have liked him, Evelyn said, not announcing it, just saying it, the way you say something you've been thinking for a while and have finally decided to say out loud. Margot looked at her. "The one Connor told me about?" "Connor told you?" "Connor tells me things. He was worried about you for a long time. He updated me when he stopped worrying." A pause. "He said this man drove out in the middle of the night because you needed someone." "He did. And stayed. And stayed." Margot was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. She would have liked him. She had very specific opinions about people who showed up. A dry edge. She had very specific opinions about everything, but especially that. Evelyn looked at the garden. At the crocus near the back wall, that single stubborn green point. "I'm still figuring it out," she said. "What it is, what it can be. I'm not always good at it." "Who is?" He's more patient than I deserve. People are rarely exactly as patient as we deserve, Margot said. They're patient because they want to be. That's a different thing. She bent down and touched the soil near the rose canes, testing it, an unself-conscious gesture that was entirely her mother's. The question is whether you're letting him. Evelyn looked at her. You know what I mean, Margot said. She did know. She'd been knowing it for a few weeks, in the way you know things that require something from you. Slowly, and then all at once, and then with a particular impatience with yourself for having taken so long. She drove home and called Mason. He answered on the third ring, slightly out of breath, and she could hear Lily in the background saying something about a ball. Sorry, hold on. His voice muffled, then clearer. Lily, I'm on the phone. And Lily, at full volume. Is it Evelyn? Is it? He said into the phone. It is, Evelyn confirmed. She wants to know if you can come Saturday. She's been saying it for a week and apparently has decided to escalate. Tell her yes. She paused. Tell her I'll bring something from the greenhouse. The tomatoes aren't ready yet. Not tomatoes. Basil. For cooking. A brief muffled relay. Then Lily's voice, distant but clearly satisfied. She can bring it in a little pot and I can take care of it. And then, louder, obviously directed at the phone, I'll take really good care of it. She heard me, Evelyn said. She hears everything. It's a design flaw. It's not a flaw. From a privacy standpoint, Saturday, she said. Saturday, he confirmed. She could hear him smiling. She held the phone for a moment after she hung up, sitting in her car in her own driveway in the gray February afternoon. The house was in front of her, large and stone and still, and it looked different to her now than it had looked 11 months ago, on an October night when a man she barely knew had pressed her gate intercom at 11:30 because a mutual friend was worried. The house hadn't changed. She had. She thought about what Dr. Reeves had said on Thursday, something she'd been turning over since. The work you've done this year isn't about becoming a different person. It's about being able to hold more of who you already are. She'd resisted the framing at first, as she resisted most framings that felt too tidy. But sitting in the car in the February gray, she thought it was more accurate than she'd given it credit for. She wasn't different. She was just more of herself, less managed, less defended, still capable of spending 45 minutes in a board meeting being absolutely ruthless about a budget line without a flicker of sentimentality, and also capable of talking to a tomato plant in a glass room. Both things simultaneously, without contradiction. That was not a small thing. She'd spent a long time believing you had to choose. March came in with the particular relief of a month that you've been waiting for, and the city responded by doing everything slightly faster, slightly lighter. People on the streets with their coats open before it was technically warranted, the first restaurant to put tables outside again, a collective decision to be done with the indoor dark, regardless of what the temperature technically justified. The Helen Ashcroft Foundation had its first official board meeting on a Thursday morning in early March. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, a different table than the Ashcroft Industries board used, in a rented space downtown, deliberately separate from the company, and looked at the 7 people she'd assembled, all of whom had agreed to this project for their own real reasons, none of whom were there because of obligation to her professional position. That distinction mattered. She'd been careful about it. She opened the meeting without a speech. She'd been advised to give a speech. Her communications director had sent her 3 drafts, and she'd read all 3 and not used any of them. Instead, she said, "You all know what we're trying to build. I want to spend this meeting on the hardest questions, not the easy ones, so let's start there." They started there. It was difficult and productive in the way things are when the people in the room are not performing contribution, but actually making it. She left 3 hours later with a list of decisions made and another list of things that required more work and the specific satisfaction of having done something real. She texted Mason from the car, "First board meeting done." His response came back in 2 minutes. "And? Hard, good, both." Helen's reaction? She thought about that. She would have told me the refreshments were insufficient and then approved of the agenda. High praise. For her, yes. She smiled at her phone, put it in her bag, started the car. The foundation had already begun its first intake process for the mentorship program. Applications from women in the early stages of building businesses, specifically from neighborhoods and backgrounds that didn't typically produce the kind of networks that changed outcomes. Reading the applications had been something she did in the evenings now, sometimes with Mason on the phone if he was available, sometimes alone. She'd read one the previous week that had stopped her. A 23-year-old who'd written with the raw earnestness of someone who didn't know yet to be strategic about their vulnerability. I have a good idea. I've had it for 2 years. I just need someone to believe it's worth their time. She'd written in the margin of the application, in handwriting that was her own, but felt in that moment like it was reaching toward someone else's. It is. You are. On a Saturday in the third week of March, Mason and Lily came to the house for what had become a regular enough occurrence that Lily had opinions about which mug was hers. The yellow one, specifically, for hot chocolate, a preference she had communicated clearly on her second visit, and which Evelyn had accommodated without comment, reserving the yellow mug in a way that Lily noticed and did not mention, but was obviously pleased by. That Saturday felt different from the others in some way that Mason noticed without being able to immediately name. The light, maybe? The March light was doing something real by mid-afternoon, actual warmth in it, coming through the tall windows of the sitting room at an angle that it hadn't managed all winter. Or maybe it was Lily, who was in the greenhouse with more than her usual focus, having brought a small notebook in which she was writing observations with a pencil she'd brought herself. Or maybe it was just the accumulated weight of months of ordinary things that had become, in their accumulation, something that mattered. He found Evelyn in the kitchen, making tea, and leaned in the doorway. "She's taking notes," he said. "I know, she asked me for the names of every plant 20 minutes ago. I had to find the consultant's chart. She's going to quiz you later." "I'm aware. I've been reviewing." Evelyn poured water from the kettle with the quiet domestic fluency of someone who has made tea in this kitchen enough times that it no longer requires thought. "She told me the basil is flourishing." High praise from Lily. She said, "It looks really good," and then corrected herself and said flourishing is the proper term. Where did she get that word? "The gardening book you gave her for her birthday." Evelyn paused. "She's read it?" "She's read 40 pages. She reads it like other kids read adventure novels." Evelyn set the kettle down and looked at him with an expression that was hard to describe, something warm and slightly disbelieving and entirely genuine. The expression of a person who keeps being surprised by evidence of something they've hoped for. "That book was Helen's," she said. He hadn't known that. "Evelyn, I wanted Lily to have it. It seemed right." She turned back to the tea. Helen would have said the same thing about a kid who takes plants seriously. He crossed the kitchen and stood beside her, close enough that their arms were almost touching, and she didn't move away or adjust. She handed him his cup. They stood at the counter together and drank their tea and watched through the kitchen window as Lily moved down the greenhouse tables with her notebook, writing things in it with great seriousness. "Can I say something?" he said. "You always ask that. And you always say yes. And I always mean it." She looked at him. "Say it." "I'm in love with you." He said it plainly, without build-up or dramatic framing, in the way he did things that he'd thought about for a long time and decided on and didn't need to perform. "I thought you should know that. Not because I need you to say it back right now, just because it's true and I didn't want to keep not saying it." The kitchen was quiet. Through the window, Lily wrote something in her notebook. Evelyn looked at her cup, then at him. There was something moving across her face that was not managed and not performed. Something that arrived from somewhere underneath the composed exterior, genuine and slightly unsteady. The particular vulnerability of a person who has learned to be careful about what they let themselves feel and is choosing, right now, to stop being careful about this. "I know," she said. "You know?" "I've known for a while." She looked at him steadily. "I just needed to hear you say it." "Why?" "Because I needed to know you were sure." A pause. "I'm harder to be with than I look, Mason. I work too much and I go quiet when I should talk, and I have things in me that are still not fixed and probably won't ever be entirely fixed, and I've been a very solitary person for a very long time, and Evelyn, I'm listing the reasons you should consider this carefully. I've considered it carefully. I'm an engineer. Careful consideration is what I do." He looked at her. "I'm sure." She exhaled. slowly, like something she'd been holding for months. "I love you too," she said, not as an answer to his words, or not only that, as its own statement with its own weight. "I've been working up to saying it. I'm slower than you at this kind of thing." "I know. It doesn't mean I feel it less." "I know that too." She looked at him for a moment, and then she did something that surprised him. She reached over and took his hand, there at the kitchen counter, a simple, deliberate thing, her hand over his, and she held it. They stood that way while Lily finished her notes in the greenhouse. The terrace off the back of the house had been closed all winter, the furniture covered with gray weatherproofing, the planters empty, the string lights that followed the railing dark and coiled. In April, Evelyn had it opened up. New planters with spring things in them, the furniture uncovered and rearranged slightly, the lights restrung and rewired by someone who actually knew what he was doing because the previous installation, she admitted, had been optimistic about the wiring situation. The first evening they sat out there, a Friday in late April, the air finally warm enough to be outside after dark without a coat, though Lily still had a sweater on by parental requirement, felt like something. The city spread out below them, lit up in the way cities are at dusk, that specific 2-minute window where the sky is still blue, but the lights are on, and everything is competing in a way that shouldn't be beautiful, and is. Lily was telling them about a conversation she'd had with her teacher about the Peninsula incident. The substitute teacher from months ago had apparently come back, and Lily had, with considerable deliberation, gone up afterward to tell her it was okay, and that she hadn't been upset. The regular teacher had overheard, and told Lily it was a very mature thing to do. Lily had, by her own account, said thank you and gone back to her desk. "Were you actually okay with it?" Evelyn asked. Lily considered this with the seriousness she gave important questions. "Kind of," she said. "At first I was embarrassed, but then I thought, she didn't know. And feeling bad about things you didn't know is kind of sad." A pause. "So I told her." "That was kind," Evelyn said. "My dad says you can be sad about something and also not be mad at the person who caused it." "Your dad is right." Lily looked at Mason with the expression of a child who has just had a parental position confirmed by a third party and intends to use this. "You're right about that," she said. "I know," he said. "You could have just said so without me having to get confirmation." "Where's the fun in that?" Lily looked at Evelyn. "He does this." "I've noticed," Evelyn said. It's annoying." "Also noticed." Mason raised his hands. "Outnumbered," he said. "Significantly," Evelyn said, and she said it with a lightness that came easily, that he had watched become easier over months, the dry humor that had always been there surfacing more readily now, less guarded, less deployed as deflection, and more as genuine pleasure. Lily fell asleep on the outdoor sofa around 9 o'clock, which she did sometimes with the sudden completeness of a young child who has used everything up and just stops. Mason put his jacket over her and she didn't wake. They let her sleep. He and Evelyn sat in the chairs on the other side of the terrace, close enough to hear Lily's breathing, far enough to talk quietly without waking her. The city below them was doing its Friday night thing, a low hum of traffic and life. The lights doing their best impression of stars for people who couldn't easily see the real ones. "Can I show you something?" Evelyn said. She went inside and came back with her laptop, and she turned it to face him. It was the Foundation website, not launched yet, still in the final stages, but complete enough to see what it would be. Clean, unfussy design, the Foundation's name at the top. A photograph of the warehouse building under renovation. A description of the mentorship program. An application portal with a simple heading. "Do you have a good idea? We'd like to hear it." He read through it. Not quickly. He actually read it, the way he read things he wanted to understand rather than just process. "This is good," he said. "The design team did well." "Not the design, the language." He pointed at the screen. "Do you have a good idea? We'd like to hear it." "That's not corporate language, I wrote that part myself." A pause. "I rewrote it 4 times. The first 3 versions sounded like a press release." "What made you land on that one?" She looked at the screen. "I kept thinking about what it would have meant to me at 22, what I would have needed to read." A pause. "What Helen said to me, in different words, but that. She wanted to hear it. That was the whole thing. Someone who actually wanted to hear it. He turned the laptop back toward her. When does it launch? He said. 2 weeks? The board approved the timeline last Thursday. She closed the laptop. I'm afraid of it. Of launching it? Of it mattering. Of doing it wrong. Of all the ways something real can fail. She looked at him. It was easier to keep it a project. Projects have timelines and deliverables and success metrics. This is a person. She looked at him. A program for people, which means it's a person, he said, or a lot of them. And you can't quality control a person. No. That's the fear. That's exactly the fear. She exhaled. I've spent 15 years being very good at things I can control. This is a departure. How does that feel? Terrifying, she said without hesitation, and then quieter. Correct. On the sofa, Lily made a small sound in her sleep and settled deeper. They both looked at her for a moment. She does that, Mason said. That sound. She's been doing it since she was a baby. She looks like you when she sleeps. Sarah always said she looked like her grandmother. Maybe both. Maybe both, he agreed. A comfortable quiet. The city. The lights. I've been thinking about the house, Evelyn said. What about it? It's too large. She said it like a fact she'd been assembling for a while and had only just finished. It made sense once I had a reason to want scale, to want something that felt like proof of something. And then it just became where I lived, by default. A pause. It's very hard to feel at home in a house where you chose the size out of ambition rather than need. Are you thinking of moving? I'm thinking about it. Not urgently, but yes. She looked at the city below. Somewhere I actually fit. Somewhere with a greenhouse that isn't the size of a tennis court. A slight self-aware edge. Somewhere a 6-year-old doesn't have to say, whoa, when she comes through the gate. He looked at her. She said that? The first night you brought her, she pressed her face to the car window and said, whoa, in a voice that I found more honest than any property assessment I've ever received. He laughed. She means it as a compliment. I know she does. That's why it stayed with me. Evelyn looked at her hands in her lap. I want things that fit, Mason. That's what this year has taught me, mostly. To stop acquiring things for the size of them and start asking whether they fit. He understood what she meant and also understood that it meant more than houses. You fit, he said, simply. She looked at him with the look he'd come to know. The measuring one. The one that had once made him feel assessed, and that he now understood as the way she expressed trust, the way she let people in by paying them full attention. I know, she said. May arrived, and with it the foundation launch, which happened on a Tuesday morning with a press release and a website going live and a brief, carefully worded statement from Evelyn that said what needed to be said without saying more than was true. She'd rejected 3 drafts from the communications team and written the final version herself on a Sunday morning, sitting in the greenhouse, talking out loud to the plants while she worked through what she actually wanted to say versus what she was expected to say. The response was larger than she'd anticipated. Not in a celebrity coverage way. She'd been deliberate about the launch being quiet, not a spectacle, but in the way that matters more, applications. Within the first 48 hours, more than 300 women had submitted to the mentorship program. She read them in order late at night with a cup of tea and no particular urgency, and each one was a person, and she held that awareness without letting it become paralyzing. She called Mason on Wednesday night. 342, she said when he answered. Applications? In 2 days. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him settling somewhere, the sound of him finding a comfortable position, which she recognized by now as the sound of him preparing to actually listen. How does that feel? He said. Like I'm responsible for something I can't fully control. A pause. Which is, as it turns out, the only kind of thing worth being responsible for. Helen said something like that? I said it, just now, for the first time. A beat, then, good. I might put it on the wall of the foundation office. Do it. She looked at the stack of applications on her desk, printed because she wanted to hold them, had made that decision deliberately, had wanted to feel the weight of them in a physical way. "There's a woman from the East Side," she said. 26. She's been running a very small textile business out of her apartment for 3 years. She described her idea, and it's genuinely good. She just needs the room. What kind of room? Workspace initially, then market access, then capital eventually, but not yet. A pause. She just needs someone to clear some of the obstacles out of the way and let her run. Sounds like someone else I know. She was quiet for a moment, then, "Helen gave me room." Her voice was even, but with something underneath it. "That's what she did. She didn't carry me. She just made enough room that I could move." "That's what you're building." "I'm trying." "You're doing it." She put her hand flat on top of the stack of applications on the desk. The weight of them. The specific realness of 342 people who had decided to say, "I have a good idea. I'd like someone to hear it." "I'm going to go read more of them," she said. "Go," he said. "Call me when you're done if you're not too tired." "It'll be late." "I know." She read until 1 in the morning. Then she called him and he answered, half asleep, and she told him about 3 of the ones that had stayed with her most, and he listened and said the right things, which in this context meant mostly just responding to what she actually said, rather than to what he thought she needed to hear. By the time they hung up, she was calmer, which was not something she'd expected from talking about the weight of 342 people. But that was the specific and particular thing about him. He didn't reduce weight, he just helped you carry it. She fell asleep quickly, for the 3rd time this week, which Dr. Reeves had told her to notice. She noticed. Summer came gradually, then all at once. Lily finished 1st grade with a report card that Mason read with the specific pride of a parent who is trying not to be too visibly smug about their child's teacher's assessment, and she launched immediately into summer with a program of activities she'd organized herself, which included twice-weekly visits to Evelyn's greenhouse that had become, through some organic and inevitable process, simply part of her summer schedule. Evelyn had cleared a section of the growing table nearest the south window and designated it Lily's, and Lily was growing 3 things there with results that varied by plant, but were universally approached with scientific seriousness. The tomatoes had come in. Not many, 6, small and slightly irregular and triumphantly red, and Lily had been present for the first real fruit with an expression on her face that Mason privately thought was one of the better things he'd seen in recent memory. Evelyn had looked at the tomatoes and then at Lily, and her face had done the thing it did sometimes, that open and not managed thing, and she'd said, "We should give one to Margot." Lily had considered this. "Who's Margot?" "The daughter of someone I loved very much. These were her mother's favorite thing to grow." Lily looked at the tomatoes. "We should give her 2, she said. "One feels lonely." Evelyn had looked at her for a moment, this 7-year-old who said things like that without knowing fully what they cost. "You're right," she'd said. "We'll bring 2. They'd gone the following Sunday, all 3 of them, which was not something Evelyn had planned, but which happened because Lily asked to come and Mason said it was Evelyn's call. And Evelyn, after a moment's thought, said yes. Margot opened the blue door and looked at the 3 of them on her step. Evelyn, Mason, and Lily holding a small paper bag with 2 tomatoes in it. And something moved across her face that was recognition of something she hadn't known she was waiting for. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." They sat in Helen's kitchen, all 4 of them, and Lily asked Margot about the garden with the thorough curiosity she brought to everything, and Margot answered with the patient specificity of someone who was very like her mother in this particular way. And Mason sat beside Evelyn at the small table, and they drank their tea, and the afternoon light came through the window onto the garden outside, and the tomatoes sat on the counter in their paper bag waiting to be the reason for something. Before they left, Margot took Evelyn by the arm in the hallway, briefly, while Mason helped Lily find her shoes. "She would have said you figured it out," Margot said quietly. Evelyn looked at her. "I'm still figuring it out." "That's what she would have meant," Margot said. The evening of the last Friday in June, Mason and Evelyn sat on the terrace as the sun went down over the city. Not a special occasion, No anniversary, no celebration, just a Friday. The ordinary end of an ordinary week that had contained ordinary difficulties. The hospital renovation had been completed that Monday, formally, with a handshake and a set of documents that Mason had signed with the specific relief of finishing something large and real. Evelyn had spent most of the week in meetings about the Foundation's second cohort of mentorship applicants. The first cohort being 3 months in and already producing results that she was careful not to oversell to the board, but that she privately found extraordinary. Lily was inside, allegedly doing something quiet, which in practice meant doing something that would reveal itself to be less quiet than advertised within approximately 15 minutes. The city below was doing its summer evening thing, warmer, louder, the particular urban energy of a Friday night in June when people remember why they live here. Evelyn had a glass of wine. Mason had a beer. The terrace plants were doing well. Lily's influence, a summer project, pots of herbs along the railing, and 2 small flowering things that she had selected and placed with the confidence of someone who has done a great deal of research. "I have something to tell you," Evelyn said. He looked at her. "Okay." "I made an offer on a house." He was quiet for a moment. "Where?" 12 minutes from your apartment." She looked at her wine. I want to be clear that I'm not doing that because of, I am partly doing it because of you and Lily, but not in a, I found the house because it fit. The size, the light, the garden. It has an actual garden, not a landscape installation. And there's a room off the back that could be a greenhouse, a real one, manageable. She looked at him. "And it's 12 minutes from your apartment, which I noticed." "You noticed?" "I noticed things. It's a professional skill that bleeds over." He looked at the city below them. "When did you make the offer?" "Tuesday." "You've known since Tuesday." "I wanted to see how I felt about having said it before I said it out loud." A pause. "I feel fine about it." 12 minutes, he said. 12 minutes. He turned his beer bottle in his hands. He thought about the arithmetic of the last 8 months. The first night, the cold kitchen, the fire burning low, a woman on the floor of her heart who didn't know how to ask for help, and a man who showed up because someone asked him to and stayed because it was the right thing to do. He thought about all the ordinary things that had accumulated between that night and this one, the texts and the dinners and the arguments about architecture, the greenhouse and the tomatoes and the plant care schedule, the note in the back of a book, the kiss in a hallway under a flickering light, 342 applications on a desk. He thought about the way Lily had said she talks to me like I'm a real person, and the way Evelyn had read a gardening book written in a dead woman's margins and decided to build something. He thought about a grocery list on a fridge that he still knew where to find. He thought about showing up, just that, at the foundation of it. The act of continuing to show up, for Lily, for work, for Evelyn, for the ordinary responsibilities of a life lived among other people. He'd thought for a long time that being a widower and a single father meant he was running at something like a deficit. Like life had taken something from him, and the job now was to manage the remainder. It had taken him most of the past year to understand that wasn't how it worked, that you didn't grieve a person and emerge smaller, that showing up for someone else, really showing up, staying when it was easier to go, being present when presence cost something, that didn't deplete you. It did the opposite. "Mason," Evelyn said. "Yeah." "Say something." 12 minutes is a good number," he said. She looked at him. The light was doing the 2-minute thing again. Sky still blue, lights coming on, that brief window of impossible competition. In it, her face was open in the way it had learned to be. Not perfectly, not without effort, but genuinely. The edges still there. The things still unresolved, still being worked through, still imperfect in the specific ways that real people are imperfect. But open. "You're sure?" she said. "I've been sure for a while." Even with, she gestured, a small thing, herself, the house, the complicated arithmetic of who she was. "Especially with," he said. She exhaled, a long, slow breath, and she looked at the city spread out below them, the June evening city, and she said nothing for a little while, and he didn't make her. There's a thing about grief, real grief, the kind that gets into the structure of you, that people don't tell you because it's hard to say without sounding wrong. It doesn't go away. You don't heal past it. You don't eventually arrive at a place where the person is gone and it doesn't cost anything. What changes is that the cost becomes something you can carry without putting everything else down. What changes is that the room starts to share space with other rooms, and you learn that you can stand in one and still remember the other, and that remembering isn't the same as being stuck. Mason still had the grocery list. He would always have the grocery list. Sarah was in Lily's lopsided braids, and her specific laugh, and her certainty about things that deserved certainty, and that would never go anywhere. There was no arrival point, no finish line where the past stopped mattering. He'd stopped wanting one. Evelyn would always have Helen in the margins of books, in the smell of a specific hand lotion on a bathroom counter, in the 2 tomatoes she'd brought to a blue-doored house on a Sunday afternoon, in every application from every woman who just needed someone to say, "It's worth their time." The Sunday mornings would always have a particular shape to them. The telephone would always carry a particular silence at 11 years of accumulated absence. That was simply true. What was also true, what the year had made room for, was this: the terrace, the summer light, the sound of Lily inside, which had shifted from quiet to what was clearly a project of some kind involving what sounded like a measuring tape. "What is she doing?" Evelyn said. "I have no idea," Mason said. "Should we check?" "Probably." Neither of them moved immediately. The city went on doing what cities do. All those lives, all that noise, the specific and various human project of continuing. Below the terrace, somewhere in it, 342 people were building things. A woman with a textile business in an East Side apartment was 3 months into a mentorship that was going, by last report, well. A structural engineer had signed off on a hospital renovation that would serve people for the next 40 years. A 6-year-old was measuring something with unknown but serious purpose. "I'm glad you came that night," Evelyn said. "The first one. Connor asked me to." "You could have said no." "I know." He looked at her. "I'm glad I didn't." She turned and looked at him fully, in the way she did when she meant it completely. "So am I." Inside, Lily appeared in the terrace doorway. She had the measuring tape in one hand and her notebook in the other, and the expression of someone with findings to report. "I measured the space for a new planter," she announced. "On the left side, there's room for a big one." "What are you planning to grow?" Evelyn asked. "Tomatoes," Lily said, as though this were obvious. "And basil, because they grow better together." She said it with the authority of someone who has done the reading. "They're companions." Evelyn looked at her, then at Mason. He kept his expression neutral. He was, as he'd mentioned before, an engineer. Observations were what he had. "All right," Evelyn said to Lily. "Show me the measurements." Lily came out onto the terrace with her notebook and began to explain, with great seriousness, what she'd determined about the space and what it could hold. Evelyn listened with her full attention. The city continued below them, lit up and ongoing, indifferent and beautiful the way cities are. The light finished its 2-minute trick and settled into the ordinary dark of a summer evening. They stayed on the terrace for a long time after.